My husband Leo left me stranded at the DMV with nothing but a flimsy purse, speeding off in his luxury car with his new assistant. He thought he was giving me a taste of humility, expecting me to crumble and beg for his return. What he didn't know was that I was walking into a place where my secret influence was about to turn his carefully constructed world upside down. And when I walked into Director Thompson's office and was introduced as the new state director, the look of disbelief on his face would be nothing compared to the shock Leo was about to experience when his perfect life came crashing down. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights of the Department of Motor Vehicles hummed above me, casting a harsh glow on the endless rows of uncomfortable plastic chairs. I clutched my small handbag, the only item Leo had deemed me worthy of after 15 years of marriage. His sleek black sedan, still carrying the faint scent of my expensive perfume, mixed with the cloying sweetness of his new assistant's cheaper fragrance, had vanished around the corner, leaving me amidst the bustling chaos of the DMV. His parting words, delivered with a smug chuckle, echoed in my ears. "Maybe a few hours of bureaucratic hell will teach you some independence, Eliza. Don't expect me to come rescue you. You made your choice." The irony was not lost on me. I had driven past this building countless times, always in a hurry, never imagining I'd one day be standing on its drab linoleum floor, not as a quick-trip patron, but as someone abandoned, and to all outward appearances, utterly helpless. Leo's laughter, so condescending and assured, reverberated in my mind, a stark contrast to the quiet hum of the DMV, filled with the murmurs of frustrated patrons and the rhythmic click of keyboards. He truly believed he had broken me, reduced me to someone who would crawl back, begging for a sliver of the life we once shared. What he didn't realize, what he couldn't realize, was that he had just delivered me to the one place in the state where I held more power than his inflated ego could ever comprehend. The automatic doors slid open with a gentle whoosh, and the familiar, almost sterile scent of recycled air, mixed with the faint aroma of stale coffee, washed over me. The lobby was a hive of quiet, almost resigned activity. Citizens filling out forms with furrowed brows, employees methodically processing paperwork behind glass partitions, and a long, snaking line of individuals waiting for their number to be called. Each person seemed purposeful, yet weary, a dedication born of necessity. This was exactly the kind of public service hub I had envisioned supporting when I had first started quietly lobbying for increased funding and improved infrastructure for state agencies, all behind a veil of meticulous anonymity, 3 years prior. I approached the information desk, where a young woman with a kind yet tired smile looked up from her computer screen. "Hi there," I began, my voice steadier than I felt, a practiced calm honed over years of high-stakes negotiations in the shadows. I need to speak with the director. It's a matter of some urgency." The volunteer's expression immediately shifted, her empathy apparent. "Of course, ma'am. Let me see if Director Thompson is available. She'll take good care of you." She picked up her phone, speaking quietly into the receiver. "Director Thompson, there's a citizen here who needs to speak with you directly." "Yes, I'll send her right up." My heart began to beat a little faster, a thrill of anticipation mixed with a flicker of genuine nervousness. Director Olivia Thompson had been at the helm of the State Department of Motor Vehicles for 7 years, transforming it from a notoriously inefficient bureaucratic nightmare into a surprisingly streamlined and customer-friendly agency. I had followed her work meticulously, poring over every public report, every budget proposal, every strategic plan. I knew her vision, her challenges, and her quiet triumphs better than she knew I existed. My influence, though unseen, had directly supported many of her key initiatives, from technology upgrades to staff training programs. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt strangely symbolic, a slow ascent to a destiny Leo had unwittingly orchestrated. Through the tinted window I could see Leo's car still idling across the street, a dark, arrogant blotch against the gray asphalt. He was waiting, undoubtedly expecting me to emerge within the hour, a broken woman, apologetic and ready to accept his terms. The thought made my jaw clench with a steely resolve. No, Leo, not today. Today, my world was just beginning. Director Thompson's office door bore a simple, elegant brass nameplate. There was no clutter, no personal touches, just a sense of quiet authority. I knocked softly, and a warm, clear voice invited me to come in. Olivia Thompson was exactly as I had pictured her from the numerous official photographs and public appearances I had studied. Mid-50s, with intelligent, kind eyes, her dark hair neatly pulled back and dressed in a perfectly tailored practical suit. Her office walls, unlike the lobby, were tastefully adorned with commendations, framed awards for public service, and a few discreet photos of her family. She looked up from her desk, her expression one of polite, professional inquiry. "Hello?" she said, gesturing to a comfortable leather chair opposite her desk. "I'm Olivia Thompson. Please, have a seat. I understand you're looking for assistance?" I settled into the chair, taking a moment to gather my thoughts and observe this remarkable woman. She had been, in her own way, a silent hero to me, a beacon of integrity in the often murky waters of state bureaucracy, long before we had ever met. "Yes," I began, my voice carrying a hint of the bitterness I felt. "My husband brought me here tonight. He said this was where I belonged." Olivia's expression immediately softened, a flicker of genuine compassion in her eyes. "I'm so sorry to hear that, ma'am. No one deserves to be abandoned, especially not by someone who's supposed to love and support them." She pulled out a standard intake form, her pen poised. "Let's start with the basics, if you don't mind. What's your name?" "Eliza Vance," I replied, watching her carefully for any flicker of recognition. There was none, precisely as it should be. All my substantial anonymous contributions, the quiet lobbying, the strategic partnerships, they had all been meticulously channeled through layers of shell corporations and blind trusts, designed to maintain complete anonymity. "Okay, Eliza," she continued, her voice gentle and reassuring. "Do you have any immediate medical needs? Are you feeling safe right now?" As Olivia moved through the standard questions, personal information, emergency contacts, immediate needs, I found myself genuinely impressed by her thoroughness and sensitivity. Every question was asked with genuine care, every response noted with an attention that suggested each person who sat in this chair mattered to her personally, not just as another number in the system. She was everything I had hoped she would be. "Now, I want you to know that the Department of Motor Vehicles offers far more than just basic licensing and vehicle registration services," Olivia continued, pulling out a folder of information. "We have robust programs for public outreach, community education on road safety, assistance with identification for vulnerable populations, and even partnerships with legal aid if you need help navigating complex personal matters." The mention of legal aid, particularly in the context of personal matters, made me think of the carefully prepared documents hidden in my safe deposit box. Documents Leo knew absolutely nothing about, and whose existence would soon shatter his carefully constructed illusion of control. But that was a revelation for another time, a card to be played when the stakes were higher. "We can certainly assist you with immediate needs tonight, if necessary, and tomorrow we can talk about longer-term options, including our community support initiatives and partnerships with other state agencies." Olivia's voice carried the kind of genuine warmth that couldn't be faked, a clear testament to her dedication to public service, something I had long admired from afar. "I want you to know, Eliza, whatever brought you here tonight doesn't define your future. We've helped hundreds of people navigate difficult situations and rebuild their lives, and we're here to help you do the same." I felt an unexpected surge of emotion, a mix of gratitude and a strange, almost giddy sense of power. Here was this incredible woman, offering hope and dignity to someone she believed had lost everything, never knowing that the person sitting across from her had been quietly ensuring her department had the very resources to do exactly this work. Through the window, I could still see Leo's car, a dark silhouette against the setting sun. He was checking his watch now, undoubtedly growing impatient, perhaps even irritated that I hadn't come running back yet. In his mind, this was a calculated maneuver, designed to break me, to force me to accept his affair with his new assistant Bridget, and to make me grateful for whatever scraps of our marriage he was willing to toss my way. What Leo didn't understand was that he'd just given me the perfect vantage point, the ideal stage from which to watch his meticulously crafted world collapse. "Olivia," I said quietly, my voice taking on a new, firmer tone. "Before we proceed with the intake, there's something I need to tell you. Something that's going to sound impossible, perhaps even outlandish, but I need you to trust me." She leaned forward slightly, her professional demeanor shifting to one of genuine curiosity, a flicker of intrigue in her eyes. "Of course, Eliza. What is it?" I took a deep breath, knowing that the next words would change everything, not just for me but for her perception of the department she so diligently served. "My maiden name is Eliza Sterling, and for the past 3 years I've been the anonymous donor funding over 60% of this department's supplemental budget, the one that's allowed for all the technological upgrades, the training programs, the community outreach initiatives, and even the new satellite offices." The pen in Olivia's hand clattered to the desk, startlingly loud in the quiet office. Her eyes widened, first in disbelief, then in a dawning realization as she stared at me, processing the implications of what I had just said. I could almost see her mind racing, connecting the dots. The mysterious benefactor who'd transformed their capabilities, who'd funded the new online portal that had drastically cut wait times, who'd made it possible for them to hire additional staff and expand their services far beyond what state allocations allowed. That's impossible," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The Sterling Trust donations are anonymous by design," I finished, a small, knowing smile playing on my lips. "But I think it's time that changed." Olivia's shock was everything I'd expected, and more. But my story, my true journey, didn't start with Leo's cruelty or my secret philanthropy. It began 18 months earlier, with my father's sudden death, and an inheritance that would change everything, including the man I thought I had married. What happened next would test every assumption Leo had made about power, about money, and about the woman he had so casually discarded on a Tuesday night at the DMV. The call came at 2:37 a.m. on a Wednesday in March. I remember the exact time because I was staring at the digital clock on my nightstand, unable to sleep due to another one of Leo's emergency work trips that had become increasingly frequent, increasingly suspicious. When my phone rang displaying the hospital's number, my first thought was a strange, grim relief. Finally, a distraction from wondering which luxury hotel Leo was actually staying in, and with whom. "Mrs. Vance, this is Dr. Albright at St. Jude's Hospital. I'm afraid I have some difficult news about your father." The words that followed seemed to echo from very far away, muffled and indistinct yet chillingly clear. "Massive stroke. Did everything we could." I sat in our empty bedroom, still wearing the silk pajamas Leo had bought me for Christmas, and felt my world tilt sideways. At 72, Dad had been the picture of vibrant health, playing golf 3 times a week, taking long morning walks around his sprawling estate, and still actively managing the Sterling Trust, the philanthropic foundation he had built from nothing. He was my rock, my confidant, and the quiet force behind so much good in the community. Leo returned from his business trip just in time for the funeral arrangements. He was full of appropriate sympathy and an almost unsettling efficiency, handling the flowers, the catering, the endless stream of visitors who came to pay their respects to one of the state's most respected philanthropists. I was grateful for his take-charge attitude, too numb with grief to handle the logistics myself. "Don't worry about anything, sweetheart," he whispered during Dad's viewing, his arm protective around my shoulders. "I'll take care of everything. You just focus on saying goodbye." The funeral was a testament to Dad's immense impact. Hundreds of people packed St. Michael's Cathedral, from prominent business leaders to dedicated social workers whose programs he had quietly funded for decades. Olivia Thompson was there, though I didn't know her name at the time. She was just another face in the sea of grateful recipients of Dad's generosity, dabbing her eyes as she listened to the eulogy about a man who dedicated his life to uplifting others and improving public services, often through innovative, unconventional means. After the service, Leo suggested we postpone the will reading. You're in no state to deal with legal matters, he said, reasonably enough. Give yourself time to grieve properly. But Dad's attorney, an elderly gentleman named Arthur Blackwood, who had been handling our family's affairs for 40 years, insisted on meeting within the week. Your father was quite specific about the timing, Mr. Blackwood explained when Leo protested, wanting these matters settled quickly to avoid any complications. The reading took place in Mr. Blackwood's downtown office. Its dark mahogany paneling and leather-bound law books created an atmosphere of old money discretion, a world away from Leo's flashy, new money ventures. Leo sat beside me, holding my hand, his expression appropriately solemn, as Mr. Blackwood adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and opened the thick document that would change everything. To my beloved daughter, Eliza, he began, his voice clear and resonant, I leave my entire estate, including all assets, properties, and controlling interest in the Sterling Trust, with the following specific instructions. What followed was breathtaking in its scope. Dad had been worth far more than I'd ever imagined. Not just the family home and the modest investments I'd expected, but a diversified portfolio worth over $75 million, built quietly through decades of shrewd investing and strategic business ventures I'd never known about. The Sterling Trust alone controlled assets worth $30 million, making it one of the region's largest private charitable organizations, a powerhouse of philanthropic influence. But it was the next part that would prove most important, most prescient. All financial decisions regarding the Sterling Trust and estate shall be made solely by Eliza Sterling Vance, with no requirement for spousal consent or joint signatures. This provision exists to ensure the charitable mission remains focused and protected from external influences. I felt Leo's hand tighten around mine, though his expression remained perfectly composed. Later, much later, I would understand the profound significance of that moment, how Dad's lawyer had chosen his words with surgical precision, how the phrase external influences had been deliberately, meticulously chosen, how my father, with an almost supernatural foresight, had somehow known to protect me from something I couldn't yet see coming. There's also this, Mr. Blackwood continued, handing me a sealed envelope marked personal for Eliza only. I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a handwritten letter in Dad's familiar, elegant script. My dearest Eliza, if you're reading this, then I'm gone sooner than either of us hoped. I've watched you grow into a woman of incredible compassion and strength, and I trust you completely to carry on our family's mission of helping others, especially in areas of public service and civic betterment. But I must share some concerns that have been weighing on my heart. I've observed changes in Leo over the past year that trouble me. His interest in our family's financial affairs, and particularly the trust's liquid assets, has become pronounced, almost obsessive. I may be wrong. I hope I am. But I want you to be protected regardless. The trust's structure will ensure that its charitable mission cannot be compromised, no matter what circumstances you may face. Trust your instincts, sweetheart. You have your mother's sharp mind and my stubborn streak. Use both. And remember, true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the lives we touch and the difference we make. All my love. Dad. P.S. That state DMV modernization project you've been quietly championing? I've already allocated significant funds for it. Make it happen, Eliza. Make a difference where it counts. Tears blurred my vision as I folded the letter carefully, the paper soft against my fingertips. Leo was immediately attentive, rubbing my back and murmuring words of comfort, but I noticed his eyes kept drifting almost imperceptibly to the thick stack of documents on Mr. Blackwood's desk. At the time, I interpreted his interest as natural concern for our shared future. Only later would I realize he was calculating, measuring, planning. The drive home was quiet, a heavy silence filled with the unspoken weight of the massive inheritance. Leo's mind was clearly processing everything he had learned. $75 million, he said finally, his voice carefully neutral, almost a whisper. I had no idea your father was worth so much. Neither did I admitted, still reeling. He always lived so modestly. The trust work will be a big responsibility, Leo continued, his voice smooth, almost purring. Maybe I could help handle some of the financial oversight, the business decisions. Let you focus on the charitable side, the public relations. Something in his tone, A subtle shift in inflection made me think of Dad's letter, tucked safely in my purse, its words of caution echoing faintly in my mind. Dad was pretty specific about wanting me to handle it personally, I said carefully, testing the waters. Leo's smile was understanding, almost reassuring. Of course, darling. I just want to support you however I can. But I caught something else in his eyes then, a flicker of something unreadable. Frustration, perhaps, or a predatory calculation. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, swallowed by his practiced charm. That night, I sat in Dad's old study, surrounded by his worn, leather-bound books and the faint, comforting smell of his cologne still clinging to his favorite armchair. The weight of responsibility felt overwhelming, a crushing burden. Not just the sheer amount of money, but the profound trust Dad had placed in me to continue his life's work, to uphold his legacy of quiet, impactful philanthropy. The DMV modernization project Olivia now championed had been just a dream then, one of dozens of ideas I'd sketched out in my notebook of charitable initiatives. Leo brought me a cup of calming herbal tea and sat quietly while I looked through Dad's meticulously organized files, learning about grants to community health clinics, scholarship programs for underprivileged students, environmental conservation efforts, and dozens of other initiatives I'd never known about, all meticulously documented. He really changed a lot of lives, Leo said softly, his voice laced with what seemed like genuine admiration. And now I'm supposed to continue that, I replied, feeling small and inadequate, utterly dwarfed by the task ahead. You will, Leo assured me, leaning over to kiss the top of my head. A gesture of tenderness I clung to. We will. Together. At the time, those words felt like a promise, a comforting balm for my fractured soul. I had no way of knowing they were actually a quiet, insidious threat. In the weeks following Dad's funeral, Leo transformed into the husband I'd always dreamed of having. He took a leave of absence from his high-powered finance firm, claiming he wanted to help me navigate the overwhelming world of estate management and philanthropic giving. Every morning he brought me coffee in bed, the aroma of freshly brewed Colombian beans filling the air, and gently asked about my plans for the day, listening intently as I described the daunting tasks ahead. Every evening he'd sit patiently beside me as I shared my struggles with learning the Sterling Trust's complex operations, the intricate web of investments, grant applications, and legal requirements. You don't have to carry this alone, Eliza, he'd remind me constantly, his hand warm and reassuring on my shoulder as I sat hunched over Dad's enormous mahogany desk, surrounded by stacks of bewildering paperwork. I'm here for whatever you need, a true partner in all of this. The first major decision I faced was whether to continue funding the Metropolitan Public Library's digital literacy expansion project, a $4 million commitment Dad had made just weeks before his death. The library director, a passionate and visionary woman named Ms. Eleanor Vance, came to our home to plead her case. She explained how the expansion would provide crucial computer access and training to an additional 10,000 underserved community members monthly, bridging the digital divide in our city. I sat in Dad's study, feeling completely out of my depth as Ms. Vance spread architectural blueprints and detailed budget projections across the coffee table. The numbers were staggering, the responsibility terrifying. What if I made the wrong choice? What if I squandered Dad's life's work on projects that weren't worthy, or worse, weren't effectively managed? Leo listened intently to Ms. Vance's presentation, asking thoughtful questions about long-term sustainability, community impact metrics, and even the nuances of public-private partnerships. Then, with practiced grace, he gently guided her to the door with promises that we'd review everything meticulously and get back to her. When we were alone, he sat beside me on Dad's old leather couch and took my hands in his. "What does your heart tell you, Eliza?" he asked softly, his gaze sincere. "Dad believed in this project," I said, my voice shaky, uncertain. "But $4 million, what if I'm wrong? What if there are better uses for the money?" "Your father chose you for this, Eliza, because he trusted your judgment," Leo replied, brushing a stray tear from my cheek with his thumb. "And I trust it too. If you think this is what he would have wanted, then that's what we should do. We'll do it together." That "we" felt like a lifeline, a desperately needed anchor in the stormy sea of my grief and overwhelming responsibility. I signed the approval documents that afternoon, the weight of the pen in my hand feeling immense. Leo celebrated by cooking my favorite seafood pasta dinner and opening a rare bottle of vintage wine Dad had been saving for a truly special occasion. "To your first major decision as the head of the Sterling Trust," he toasted, raising his glass, his eyes twinkling. "And to your father, who would be so incredibly proud." The library expansion became a tremendous success, lauded by community leaders and earning recognition from the governor's office for its innovative approach to public education. Leo was there for every milestone: the groundbreaking ceremony, the ribbon cutting, the first day the new digital labs opened to a line of eager citizens. He took photos of me with Ms. Vance and the grateful volunteers, sent handwritten thank you notes to the construction crew, and even helped staff the information desk during the inaugural week, charming everyone with his easy smile and apparent dedication. "Look at what you've accomplished, Eliza," he'd say as we drove home after a particularly successful event, my heart full from seeing so many excited faces. "You're changing lives, darling, just like your father did. You're building on his legacy, making it even stronger." Our marriage felt stronger than it had in years. Leo had always been ambitious and career-focused, sometimes to the point where I felt like an afterthought, a quiet fixture in his fast-paced life. But now he seemed genuinely invested in my work, in my dreams, in my success. He read every grant proposal with me, attended Sterling Trust board meetings as my guest, and even helped me reorganize Dad's sprawling, somewhat chaotic filing system into something far more manageable and efficient. "We should really get you a proper office," he suggested one evening as we worked side by side at the dining room table, surrounded by stacks of paperwork and legal briefs. "Somewhere professional, where you can meet with grant recipients and potential donors, a place that truly reflects the Trust's growing prestige." The idea hadn't occurred to me, preoccupied as I was with the myriad details of the Foundation's work, but it made perfect sense. We found a beautiful space in the historic downtown district, 2 floors of a meticulously renovated brownstone, with enough room for a small dedicated staff and a spacious conference area for board meetings. Leo, with his keen business acumen, handled all the lease negotiations, the renovation planning, and even the furniture selection. "I want it to reflect your values, Eliza," he said as we walked through the empty, echoing space with the interior designer. "Elegant but not ostentatious, professional but warm, a place where people feel comfortable sharing their stories and their needs, a true hub of community impact." When the Sterling Trust's new headquarters opened 6 months after Dad's death, the local newspaper ran a prominent feature story about the young philanthropist carrying on her father's revered legacy. The photo showed Leo and me standing in the main reception area, his arm around my waist, both of us smiling, a backdrop of photographs displaying the Trust's growing impact, the successful library expansion, a new scholarship program for disadvantaged youth, a medical research grant that was already showing promising results in early clinical trials. The headline boldly proclaimed, "Power Couple Gives Back, Sterling Trust Continues Legacy of Impact." I loved seeing us described that way, as true partners in something so profoundly meaningful. Leo suggested we host monthly dinner parties for major donors and influential community leaders, a sophisticated way to cultivate relationships and inspire additional giving. Our home became a glittering gathering place for the city's philanthropic elite. Leo proved to be an excellent host, effortlessly remembering everyone's names and interests, asking thoughtful questions about their own charitable work, and making seemingly effortless connections between like-minded people. "Your husband is quite the asset, Eliza," observed Mrs. Evelyn Hayes, a prominent socialite whose own foundation focused on early childhood education. "So supportive, so knowledgeable about your work. You're truly lucky to have such a partnership." I agreed completely, basking in the glow of what I believed was a truly harmonious and impactful collaboration. During those elegant dinner parties, Leo would often stand to offer eloquent toasts about the Sterling Trust's mission, always crediting Dad's original vision and my leadership, while humbly positioning himself as simply being grateful to support such important work. He never sought the spotlight for himself, never tried to overshadow my role as the Foundation's leader. "Eliza has inherited not just her father's resources, but his incredible heart for service," he would say, raising his crystal glass, while I would blush with a mixture of pride and affection. I'm just honored to be along for the journey, a small part of something truly extraordinary. The state DMV modernization project, Dad's final explicit gift to me, outlined in that poignant PS in his letter, began to take concrete shape during this period. I spent weeks researching best practices in public sector efficiency, visiting cutting-edge government agencies in neighboring states, and interviewing civil servants and technology experts about the greatest needs in our own state's DMV system. Leo accompanied me on many of these visits, taking meticulous notes and asking practical questions about operational costs, technological scalability, and staffing requirements. "This is going to be your signature project, Eliza," he said as we toured a highly efficient, paperless DMV office in a neighboring state. "A model of what ours could become. The thing that defines your leadership of the trust, the real proof of your vision. We need to make sure it's perfect. A true testament to civic improvement." When I first met Olivia Thompson, who was then working as an assistant director at another, less efficient state agency, Leo was immediately impressed by her passion, her sharp intellect, and her deep expertise in public administration. "She's exactly what your DMV project needs," he said after our initial interview with her. "Someone with proven experience, clear vision, and genuine dedication to public service." I offered Olivia the director position for the DMV Modernization Initiative that same week, with a salary significantly higher than what she'd been earning, and a budget that would allow her to build something truly transformative, a benchmark for state agencies. The sheer joy on her face when she accepted was one of the most rewarding moments of my life, a profound sense of purpose blossoming within me. "You're going to change so many lives, Eliza," Olivia had said, tears glistening in her eyes. "Your father would be so incredibly proud of what you're making possible." Leo squeezed my hand under the table, his smile warm and encouraging. "We all are," he said softly, his voice full of what I believed was shared pride. That night, lying in bed with Leo's arm around me, I felt more content, more at peace than I had since Dad's death. I was honoring his legacy, helping improve a crucial public service for thousands of citizens, and doing it all alongside a husband who supported and celebrated every decision I made, every step of my journey. I had no idea, no inkling, that Leo was already calculating how to take it all away from me. By the Sterling Trust's first anniversary under my leadership, we had exceeded every goal I'd set. The public library expansion was serving over 12,000 families monthly, a testament to its crucial role in the community. Our scholarship program had sent 55 underprivileged students to college, many of them first-generation attendees, brimming with hope. And the medical research grant had contributed to a groundbreaking discovery in pediatric cancer treatment, offering new hope to countless families. Most importantly to me, the DMV modernization project was nearing completion, with Olivia Thompson working tirelessly around the clock to implement new digital systems, train staff, and launch innovative public outreach programs. The success felt intoxicating, a powerful validation of my capabilities. For the first time in my life, I was making decisions that directly affected thousands of people, and every choice seemed to turn out better than I'd hoped. The local business journal featured me prominently on their 30 under 30 inches list, calling me a rising force in regional philanthropy, with an intuitive understanding of community needs and a strategic vision for civic improvement. Leo framed the article, his face beaming with pride, and hung it conspicuously in our newly renovated, state-of-the-art kitchen. "Look at you, Eliza," he exclaimed, pulling me close as we admired it together, his arm tight around my waist. "A year ago, you were terrified of making one $4 million decision, and now you're running a $30 million foundation like you were born to it." He was right. The overwhelming anxiety I'd felt in those early months, the constant second-guessing, the fear of squandering Dad's legacy, all of it had been replaced by a growing, undeniable confidence. I'd learned to read complex financial reports, evaluate intricate grant proposals, and assess the long-term viability of vast charitable programs. Board meetings that had once intimidated me, reducing me to a silent observer, now felt like engaging, collaborative sessions, where my voice carried real weight and my opinions were actively sought. "I think Dad would be proud," I said, leaning into Leo's embrace, feeling a wave of affection for the man who had seemingly supported me every step of the way. "He'd be amazed, darling," Leo replied, kissing the top of my head. You've taken everything he built and made it even better, more efficient, more impactful. The DMV's grand public reopening was scheduled for a crisp Saturday in November, exactly 1 year and 8 months after Dad's death. I wanted it to be perfect, not just as a memorial to him and his civic vision, but as a resounding statement about what the Sterling Trust under my leadership could truly accomplish. Olivia and I spent weeks planning every meticulous detail, from the ribbon-cutting ceremony presided over by the governor to the community outreach fair that would introduce neighbors to their newly modernized, efficient public resource. This is going to be the most comprehensive, citizen-friendly DMV facility in the state, Olivia told me, her eyes shining with pride as we walked through the completed building the week before the grand opening. New online services, expedited processing, enhanced customer support, even a dedicated community resource center for those needing extra assistance with identification or voter registration. Your father's vision, Eliza, amplified by your resources and dedication, is truly coming to life. The main service areas were bright and welcoming, designed for efficiency and comfort. Individual kiosks provided privacy for sensitive transactions, and the waiting areas featured comfortable seating, charging stations, and interactive screens providing real-time updates. The new digital processing system could handle thousands of transactions a day, drastically cutting wait times. And the new community resource rooms would host everything from voter registration drives to public safety workshops. It's beautiful, Olivia, I said, tears welling in my eyes as I imagined the countless lives that would be made just a little bit easier, a little less stressful, within these walls. Dad would have loved seeing it. Leo appeared beside me, having spent the morning reviewing security arrangements with the opening day volunteers. The governor's office just confirmed, he said, his voice brimming with excitement. She'll be here for the ribbon cutting, along with several state senators and the chief of the state police. The major news networks are sending their senior reporters. This is going to be big. I felt a flutter of nervousness, a familiar pre-event jitters. This would be my first truly major public event, as the Sterling Trust's undisputed leader, with intense media coverage and high-ranking state officials watching my every move. What if I said something wrong? What if the turnout was disappointing, despite all our efforts? You're going to be wonderful, Eliza, Leo assured me, reading my expression with an almost uncanny accuracy. This is your moment, darling. You've earned it, and you deserve every bit of recognition. The morning of the opening dawned crisp and clear, perfect autumn weather that seemed like Dad's blessing from above. By 10 a.m., a crowd of over 500 people had gathered in front of the modernized DMV building. I saw familiar faces from our dinner parties, prominent board members, key state officials, and dozens of community members I didn't recognize, who had simply come to support the cause, drawn by the promise of improved public services. Olivia introduced me with words that made my chest swell, with a quiet, profound pride. None of this would have been possible without Eliza Vance, who didn't just continue her father's legacy, but expanded it beyond what any of us thought achievable. She saw a need in our community for greater civic efficiency and accessibility, and she refused to accept that outdated systems were inevitable. Through her unwavering support and strategic vision, she's transformed this institution into a model for the entire state. Standing at the podium with the bright blue ribbons stretched across the DMV's gleaming new entrance behind me, I felt my father's presence as clearly as if he were standing beside me, his hand resting on my shoulder. The speech I'd practiced for weeks flowed naturally, my voice strong and clear as I talked about efficiency, accessibility, and the profound responsibility we all shared to ensure our public institutions served every citizen with dignity and respect. This DMV, I concluded, looking out at the eager faces in the crowd, represents more than just new technology or shorter lines. It represents our belief that every person deserves streamlined, respectful access to essential government services. My father taught me that true wealth isn't measured by what we accumulate, but by the tangible, positive difference we make in the lives of our fellow citizens. Today, we deliver on that promise. The applause was thunderous, an almost overwhelming wave of appreciation. As I cut the ribbon and the doors officially opened, a surge of accomplishment unlike anything I'd ever experienced washed over me. This was my vision, my project, my tangible contribution to Dad's enduring legacy. Leo was the first to congratulate me, wrapping me in a tight hug that lifted me off my feet. "I'm so proud of you, Eliza," he whispered in my ear, his voice thick with emotion. "You're incredible. You're truly magnificent." The open house was a tremendous success. Families toured the new facilities, volunteers signed up for regular shifts, and several local businesses committed to ongoing partnerships. The governor pulled me aside to discuss expanding our modernization model to other state agencies. A representative from the Federal Department of Transportation asked for copies of our operational plans to share with other communities across the nation, calling it a, quote, game changer. "You've created something truly remarkable here, Mrs. Vance," said Dr. Samuel Albright, a prominent public administration professor, who had driven down from the university to see the new DMV. "The integration of services, the focus on citizen experience rather than just bureaucratic process. This is going to be studied and replicated across the region, perhaps even nationally." That evening, Leo and I collapsed onto our plush living room couch, exhausted but exhilarated. The local news had featured the DMV reopening as their lead story, with a video clip of my speech and interviews with several delighted citizens who had already experienced the vastly improved services. "Look at the comments on the Sterling Trust's social media," Leo said, scrolling through his phone, a wide smile on his face. "Hundreds of people sharing the story, praising your work, offering to volunteer or donate. You're a local hero, Eliza, a true visionary." I curled up against his side, watching the flood of positive responses. For the first time since Dad's death, I felt like I truly belonged in the formidable role he'd left me. The Sterling Trust wasn't just something I'd inherited, it was something I was actively building, improving, and shaping with my own vision and dedication. "What's next, darling?" Leo asked, his arm tightening around me, his gaze distant, almost calculating. "Now that you've conquered state bureaucracy?" I laughed at his exaggeration, but I was already thinking about the endless possibilities. Comprehensive voter registration initiatives, enhanced public transportation projects, perhaps even expanding beyond our city to help rural communities that lacked essential public services entirely. "Whatever it is," I said, a newfound confidence surging through me, "I'm ready for it. Absolutely ready." Leo's smile was warm and encouraging, but something flickered in his eyes that I didn't catch at the time. A subtle, almost imperceptible shift, a calculating look that suggested he was making plans of his own. "I'm sure you are," he said softly, almost to himself. "I'm sure you are." 6 months after the DMV's overwhelmingly successful opening, Leo approached me with what seemed like the most romantic gesture of our entire marriage. It was our 15th wedding anniversary, and he had planned an elaborate, intimate dinner at Le Ciel Bleu, the exclusive French restaurant overlooking the city skyline where he'd proposed all those years ago. "Eliza," he said, taking my hands across the candlelit table, his eyes reflecting the soft glow, "this past year and a half has shown me what an incredible woman I married. Watching you honor your father's legacy, while making it so uniquely your own, transforming the trust into something even greater, it has truly been the privilege of my lifetime." I felt tears welling up, a familiar sting behind my eyes, the relentless stress of managing the Sterling Trust, combined with the Prater. Lingering grief that still hit me unexpectedly had sometimes made me feel like I was drowning, utterly alone. Having Leo acknowledge how hard I'd been working, how much I'd grown into the role, meant everything to me. "I've been thinking," he continued, pulling out an elegant, velvet-covered jewelry box from his inner jacket pocket, "about how we can truly become partners in this mission. Not just husband and wife, but equals in building something that will outlast us both, something that will echo through generations, even more powerful and influential than anything your father ever imagined." Inside the box, nestled on a bed of white satin, was a stunning necklace, a delicate gold chain with a gleaming, intricate pendant shaped like an antique key. "It's beautiful, Leo," I breathed, my heart fluttering, but I was confused about the symbolism. "A key?" "The key represents access," Leo explained, his eyes earnest and warm, his voice a low, soothing murmur. "Access to everything you've built, everything your father entrusted to you. I want to be your true partner in this work, Eliza." Not just supportive from the sidelines, but actively involved in shaping the Sterling Trust's future, side by side, every step of the way. I unclasped the necklace and fastened it around my throat, the cool metal of the key pendant settling against my skin. "What do you mean exactly, Leo?" I asked, a faint tremor in my voice, a mix of excitement and a subtle, unidentifiable apprehension. Leo reached into his jacket again and pulled out a thick, legal-looking folder. "I've been working closely with Arthur Blackwood, discreetly, on some new legal documents that would make me co-director of the Sterling Trust. Full partnership, joint decision-making authority, shared access to all accounts and assets, equal responsibility, equal power, equal vision." My fork, halfway to my mouth, paused, then clattered softly against the plate. This was not, absolutely not, what I had expected for our anniversary dinner. "Leo, I don't know." "I know it's a big decision, darling," he said quickly, covering my free hand with his grip firm and persuasive. "But think about it. You've been carrying this enormous responsibility alone for over a year. The weight of it must be crushing at times. Wouldn't it be easier to share that burden, that immense pressure, with someone who loves you, someone who's been there for every success, every challenge, every sleepless night spent poring over financial reports?" The undeniable weight of the Sterling Trust's responsibilities had indeed been overwhelming at times. The endless board meetings, the meticulous financial oversight, the dozens of grant reviews, the delicate dance of donor relations, it never truly ended. The idea of having a true partner, someone with equal authority to help shoulder the load, someone I trusted implicitly, was undeniably appealing. "But Dad specifically left the trust to me," I said slowly, trying to articulate the nagging doubt that had just surfaced. "The will was very clear about maintaining sole control, about preventing, quote, external influences." Leo smiled smoothly, a practiced, reassuring gesture. "That was before, Eliza. Before you were married to someone who's proven himself, someone who's shown his unwavering dedication to the Trust's mission. Your father couldn't have anticipated how much I'd grow into this role, how invested I'd become in the mission, how much I genuinely care about its future. Besides, this doesn't change your father's ultimate intent. It just ensures the Trust has truly strong dual leadership for generations to come, a real legacy power couple." I looked around the elegant, hushed restaurant at other couples celebrating anniversaries and special occasions, and felt a pang of longing for the simplicity they seemed to have. Their biggest decision tonight was probably choosing between the chocolate soufflé and the crème brûlée. "The Trust means everything to me, Leo," I said carefully, emphasizing the profound personal connection. "It's Dad's legacy, it's my legacy now." "Which is exactly why it deserves two committed leaders instead of one," Leo countered, his voice persuasive, almost hypnotic. "Think about what we could accomplish together, Eliza. You have the vision and the heart, the passion for public service. I have the business acumen and the strategic thinking, the financial expertise. We'd be unstoppable, a force for good, unlike anything this state has ever seen." That word, unstoppable, sent a little thrill through me. We had been a good team this past year. Leo's suggestions had often improved my initial ideas, making them more efficient or scalable, and his connections in the business community had certainly opened doors I couldn't have accessed alone. "Arthur reviewed all the legal implications, Eliza," Leo continued, sensing my wavering, my internal battle. "The transition would be seamless. All existing grants and commitments would continue unchanged. The only difference would be that you'd have a true, equal partner, someone to lean on, instead of carrying everything alone, bearing that enormous burden all by yourself." I thought about the sleepless nights I'd spent worrying about whether I was making the right decisions, with millions of dollars that could change thousands of lives. The constant second-guessing. The pervasive fear that I might somehow disappoint Dad's memory or fail the countless people counting on the Sterling Trust's support. I don't know, Leo," I said finally, the words catching in my throat. This is such a big decision. I need time to think about it, to really process what this means. Leo's confident smile faltered ever so slightly. A fleeting moment of impatience, but he recovered quickly, his expression softening to one of understanding. Of course, darling. Take all the time you need. I just want you to know that I'm ready to make that commitment. Ready to dedicate my life to this mission the way you have. To truly build something magnificent with you. On the drive home, the antique key pendant felt strangely heavy against my chest, no longer a symbol of romantic access, but a puzzling, enigmatic weight. Leo was quiet, letting me process, but I could feel the silent expectation radiating from him, a palpable pressure. When we pulled into our sprawling driveway, he turned to face me, his hand resting gently on my knee. "I love you, Eliza," he said softly, his voice full of what sounded like genuine emotion. "And I love what we've built together. I just want to make it official. Make us true partners in every sense, in everything that matters." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while Leo slept peacefully beside me, his breathing even and deep. The thick legal documents sat on my nightstand, unread but somehow ominous in the darkness of the room. Part of me, the part that was exhausted and lonely, wanted to wake Leo and tell him yes, to share this crushing burden that sometimes felt too heavy for one person to bear. But another part of me, a small, persistent voice that sounded suspiciously like Dad's, whispered a warning I couldn't quite articulate, a vague sense of unease that coiled deep in my gut. In the morning, I knew I would have to make a decision that would change everything. Irrevocably. But lying there in the pre-dawn darkness, with the key pendant glinting like a promise or a threat in the moonlight streaming through our bedroom window, I had no idea which path would lead to my salvation, and which would lead to my complete destruction. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Against my better judgment, driven by a cocktail of exhaustion, lingering grief, and Leo's relentless persuasion, I signed the co-directorship papers 3 days later. The weight of the Sterling Trust, the sleepless nights spent wrestling with million-dollar decisions, and the subtle, insidious pressure from Leo had finally worn down my last reservations. The signing ceremony took place in Arthur Blackwood's downtown office, a room that now felt less like a sanctuary of old money discretion, and more like a stage for a slow-motion unraveling. The elderly lawyer, usually so composed, looked distinctly uncomfortable, his brow furrowed with an unspoken apprehension as he witnessed my signature. "Your father was very specific about his wishes, Eliza," Mr. Blackwood said quietly, his voice tinged with a solemn warning as I handed back the pen. "I want you to know that if you ever change your mind about this arrangement, the original will provisions can be restored. The structure is legally sound, designed for sole leadership." "That won't be necessary, Mr. Blackwood," Leo interjected smoothly, his hand possessive on my shoulder, a gesture that now felt less like support and more like a claim. "We're in this together now, a true partnership." The changes started immediately, but so subtly, so incrementally, that I almost didn't notice them at first. Like a slowly tightening net, Leo began to assume more and more control. He began arriving at the Sterling Trust office before me most mornings, claiming he wanted to, quote, "review the day's agenda and prepare briefing materials for my convenience." When I arrived, he'd greet me with a warm smile, a steaming cup of my favorite English breakfast tea, and a neatly organized stack of documents he'd already pre-screened. "I've flagged the 4 grant applications that need your personal attention today, darling," he'd say, his voice perfectly solicitous. "And I've already handled the routine renewals. No need for you to waste your precious time on the simple stuff. I've taken care of it." At first I was grateful, even relieved. The routine renewals had always been tedious, a necessary but draining part of the job. Reviewing quarterly reports from established recipients, verifying their continued compliance with grant terms, authorizing the next quarterly payments. Having Leo handle those freed me up to focus on the more complex new applications, the strategic planning, the high-level donor relations that truly excited me. But gradually, insidiously, I realized that Leo's definition of routine was expanding. Decisions that I would have considered significant, that Dad would have insisted on personally overseeing, like approving substantial budget increases for existing programs or authorizing major equipment purchases for our beneficiaries, were increasingly being made without my input, without my knowledge. The Metropolitan Library needed new high-speed servers, Eliza, Leo explained when I discovered a $50,000 expenditure I hadn't approved, buried deep in a quarterly report. Ms. Vance called this morning, quite distraught, saying they were going to lose crucial access for thousands of patrons if we didn't act immediately. I didn't want to bother you while you were in that important meeting with the governor's office, so I took the initiative. His explanation made perfect sense, and Ms. Vance confirmed the urgency when I called to discreetly check. But something nagged at me, a persistent, unsettling feeling about the pattern that was steadily emerging. Leo was increasingly positioned as the Sterling Trust's operational leader, the efficient decision-maker, while I was, without fully realizing it, being relegated to the role of visionary figurehead, the smiling face for public events. The shift became even more apparent during our monthly board meetings. Leo had always attended as my guest, sitting quietly to my left, offering input only when prompted. But now he sat at my right hand, equal in posture, with his own meticulously prepared agenda and a thick stack of reports. He spoke with growing authority about financial projections, operational efficiency, and strategic partnerships that I was only hearing about for the very first time. Leo's been absolutely invaluable in streamlining our processes, observed board member Mr. Charles Sterling, a distant cousin of Dad's and a longtime supporter, during one particularly contentious discussion about overhead costs for a new youth program. His business background is exactly what we needed to professionalize our operations and maximize our impact. I noticed that Mr. Sterling, and indeed other board members, increasingly directed their comments and questions to Leo rather than to me, despite the fact that I was supposedly chairing the meeting, sitting at the head of the table where Dad had always presided. Other board members, following suit, began asking Leo for clarification on complex budget items or seeking his opinion on program effectiveness, deferring to his apparent expertise. Perhaps we should establish clearer roles, I suggested after one meeting where I'd felt more like an observer, a decorative element, than a true leader. Define which decisions require both signatures versus which can be handled individually by either co-director. Just for clarity, you know. Leo's expression remained perfectly supportive, a picture of understanding, but I caught a flash of something else in his eyes. A flicker of irritation, perhaps, or a calculated, almost smug, amusement. Of course, Eliza, whatever makes you more comfortable, darling, though I have to say, the current system has been working exceptionally well. Our response time to urgent requests has improved significantly, and our beneficiaries are truly benefiting from our newfound agility. He was right about that. Our beneficiaries had indeed been praising our increased efficiency and responsiveness. Olivia, in particular, had mentioned how quickly the Trust now addressed operational issues at the DMV. When a crucial server had failed in January, Leo had authorized the emergency replacement within hours, rather than waiting for our next scheduled board meeting or my individual approval. But despite the apparent efficiency, I was beginning to feel like a stranger in my own organization, an unwelcome guest in the very legacy Dad had entrusted solely to me. Staff members who had once brought questions directly to me now approached Leo first. New partnerships were being discussed and sometimes even agreed to before I knew they existed. Grant applications that didn't quite align with Leo's increasingly rigid vision of strategic focus seemed to disappear from consideration, never reaching my desk. We should really standardize our grant criteria, Eliza, Leo suggested during one of our weekly planning sessions, his tone reasonable, almost pedagogical. Create clear, objective guidelines about what types of projects align with our mission and which fall outside our scope. It will ensure consistency and maximize impact. Dad always said flexibility was one of our greatest strengths, I replied, a small defiance in my voice. Being able to respond to unexpected needs and innovative approaches, supporting grassroots initiatives, that was his philosophy. Your father built a wonderful foundation, Eliza, Leo said patiently, almost condescendingly. But times have changed. We're managing much larger sums now, with greater public scrutiny and more complex financial landscapes. We need to be more strategic, more disciplined in our approach, more focused on measurable outcomes and less on sentimentality. The word disciplined stung. Was he implying that my leadership had been undisciplined? That Dad's approach had been somehow lacking, even naive? A cold knot began to form in the pit of my stomach. I started paying closer attention to the Sterling Trust's day-to-day operations, arriving earlier and staying later to surreptitiously review documents that Leo had pre-screened, the ones he deemed routine. What I found troubled me deeply. Several grant applications that I remembered being enthusiastic about, that felt perfectly aligned with Dad's inclusive vision, had been rejected without my knowledge. A promising community arts program aimed at at-risk youth had been declined for being, quote, too niche. A proposal for a mobile medical clinic for rural communities, a project close to my heart, had been dismissed for being, quote, outside our immediate geographic focus. When I questioned Leo about these decisions, he had reasonable, seemingly airtight explanations for each one. Budget constraints, regulatory concerns, questions about organizational capacity, redundancy with existing state programs. But taken together, they painted a chillingly consistent picture of a foundation becoming increasingly conservative, more insular, and less innovative under his growing unchallenged influence. The breaking point came during a casual conversation with Director Thompson about the DMV's expansion plans. She mentioned, almost offhandedly, being disappointed that the Sterling Trust had declined to fund the new Mobile Services Unit, a crucial initiative to bring DMV services to disabled citizens and remote communities, a project I had personally championed. What? Declined funding? I asked, my voice rising in disbelief. Olivia, I never saw that proposal. I certainly never declined it. Olivia looked genuinely surprised, a flicker of confusion clouding her usually clear eyes. Oh, Leo said you'd reviewed it but felt it was outside the Trust's current strategic focus. He suggested we reapply next year with a modified approach, perhaps integrating it with existing local government services. That evening, the moment Leo walked through the door, I confronted him in his home office, the place where he spent countless hours on his computer. Why didn't I see Olivia's proposal for the Mobile Services Unit? I demanded, my voice trembling with suppressed fury. He didn't even look up from his computer screen, his fingers still typing, utterly unconcerned. Because, Eliza, it was a $75,000 ask for a program that would only serve a limited number of citizens annually. The cost per beneficiary was astronomical, quite inefficient, darling. We can't just throw money at every well-meaning idea. That's not your decision to make alone, Leo, I said, my voice sharper than I intended, vibrating with indignation. Leo finally turned to face me, and for just a fleeting moment, I saw something cold, something utterly calculating. In his eyes, a flash of the predator beneath the polished facade. Actually, according to the operational guidelines we established when I became co-director, he said, his voice deceptively calm, almost amused, grants under $100,000 can be approved or declined by either co-director. I was simply saving you from having to waste time on an obviously inefficient proposal. You're far too busy with the bigger picture. I stood there, rooted to the spot, a horrifying realization dawning on me. I had signed away far more than I'd understood. Somewhere, buried deep within the convoluted legal documents that had made Leo my equal partner, there were provisions I'd missed, clauses I hadn't fully grasped, or perhaps hadn't even read with proper scrutiny in my grief-addled state. Clauses that were now being used, weaponized, to systematically exclude me from key decisions about the very foundation Dad had entrusted solely to me. From now on, I said, my voice carefully controlled, a thin veneer over a raging storm, I want to see everything, every proposal, every decision, every expenditure, no matter the amount, no matter how routine you deem it. Leo's smile was patient, almost patronizing. Of course, darling, as you wish. Though I do hope you'll trust that I am only trying to protect the Trust's valuable resources and impeccable reputation. We wouldn't want any unnecessary complications, would we? As I walked, almost stumbled, back to our bedroom, I couldn't shake the horrifying feeling that I had just lost something truly important, something fundamental to my identity and my father's legacy. The antique key pendant Leo had given me, still resting heavy around my neck, felt less like access to power and more like a chain, binding me to decisions I was no longer free to make, to a reality I no longer controlled. The shattering discovery came 3 months later, during what should have been a routine, quiet evening at home. Leo was working late at the Sterling Trust office, or so he told me, and I was catching up on reading grant applications in Dad's old study, surrounded by the comforting scent of aged paper and leather. The house felt too quiet, too empty, and I found myself, ironically, missing the early days of our partnership when we'd review everything together, even the mundane details. I decided to call Leo and suggest grabbing a late dinner when he finished up. His phone went straight to voicemail, which wasn't unusual, given how focused he became when working on complex financial reports. But when I tried the Sterling Trust office landline, it rang and rang with no answer. Perhaps he'd already left and was driving home with his phone on silent. I settled back into Dad's leather armchair with a cup of tea, intending to wait for Leo's headlights in the driveway, a familiar signal of his return. That's when I heard his voice, muffled but distinct, drifting up from the basement. Our basement had been converted into a meticulously organized home office years ago, complete with a separate phone line that Leo sometimes used for his private consulting work he had supposedly abandoned when he became co-director of the Sterling Trust. I had assumed he'd given up those private clients, dedicating himself entirely to the trust, but apparently he'd maintained some, or perhaps quietly taken on new ones. At first, I didn't pay attention to the muffled conversation below. Leo often took calls in the basement when he didn't want to disturb me, or when he was discussing sensitive business matters. But something about his tone, urgent, secretive, laced with an unfamiliar irritation, made me pause in my reading. I crept silently to the top of the basement stairs, feeling foolish, almost absurd, for eavesdropping on my own husband, but utterly unable to shake the growing feeling that something was profoundly wrong. "I told you not to call me at home, Marcus," Leo was saying, his voice sharp with thinly veiled anger. "We discussed this. Everything has to go through the proper channels now, the trust's official lines. Don't be an idiot." A pause, a muffled response from the other end of the line. "No, she doesn't suspect anything yet," Leo continued, and I nearly gasped aloud, my hand clamping over my mouth. "But Eliza is more observant than you think, and she's been asking more questions lately. The documentation has to be perfect, absolutely flawless, or she'll start asking questions we can't answer." My blood turned to ice, a chilling dread seeping into my veins. Documentation about what? Questions about what? For bullets? "Look, Marcus," Leo said, and I almost choked on my own breath at the name. Marcus Thorne, Leo's estranged younger brother, whom I'd always found charming but utterly unreliable. A serial entrepreneur whose ventures always seemed to crash and burn. I rarely saw him anymore. Leo claimed they had fallen out years ago over a bad business deal. The Sterling Trust grants have to look legitimate. We can't just funnel money to your tech startup without proper justification, without a credible project description that fits the trust's mission statement. Tech startup? Marcus worked in tech, but I had no idea he had a startup, let alone one that would receive Sterling Trust grants. And more importantly, what grants was Leo referring to? I reviewed every grant application personally. At least, I thought I did. Had I missed something? Or had he simply circumvented my authority? "I don't care if you need the money faster, Marcus," Leo snapped, his voice gaining a dangerous edge. "We stick to the timeline. 6 months of documented community digital literacy programs in underserved districts. Then we apply for the major civic innovation grant, the big one. It has to look like organic community development, a natural progression of our public service initiatives, not a scheme to line your pockets and mine." My legs gave out from under me, and I sank onto the top step, my heart pounding so loudly I was afraid Leo would hear it downstairs, reverberating through the floorboards. He was talking about creating fake charitable programs, fictional initiatives designed to justify massive grants that would somehow benefit Marcus's business. This wasn't just questionable accounting. This was sophisticated, deliberate fraud. This was theft on a grand scale, from my father's legacy, from the very people we were supposed to be helping. Bridget's been handling the paperwork, Leo continued, and I felt another jolt of sickening recognition. Bridget Vance, Leo's young, ambitious assistant, the one who had driven away with him from the DMV. She was the one who had recently taken over special projects at the trust, and had always impressed me with her meticulous attention to detail and her apparent passion for civic improvement. She's setting up all the documentation for the pilot program, fake enrollment numbers, glowing testimonials, carefully fabricated progress reports. Everything Eliza would expect to see, everything that will pass muster with the board. The basement had gone quiet, and I realized Leo was listening intently to whatever Marcus was saying on the other end. I held my breath, afraid to move, afraid to make a sound that would betray my presence, my horrifying discovery. "Fine," Leo said finally, a sigh of resignation. "But this is the last time we accelerate the timeline, Marcus. And tell Bridget to be more careful with the financial reports. Eliza's been asking more questions lately about spending patterns, about grant allocations. She's becoming a nuisance. More questions because I'd been systematically excluded from decisions," I thought bitterly, a silent scream of rage echoing in my mind. More questions because the Sterling Trust's work was becoming unrecognizable, twisted, and corrupted under Leo's fraudulent leadership. Once the Civic Innovation Project is approved, we'll have enough legitimate contracts and visible successes to justify the larger grants. The millions, Marcus, Leo continued, his voice regaining its confident, conspiratorial tone. But until then, everything has to be by the book, flawless, on paper. Eliza may be naive about business, about how the real world operates, but she's not stupid. She'll spot a sloppy accounting entry a mile away. Naive about business. The phrase cut deep, a bitter insult, especially coming from someone who'd supposedly respected and supported my vision for the trust, for the civic betterment I championed. I heard Leo's footsteps moving toward the basement stairs, and a wave of panic washed over me. I crept quickly, silently, back to Dad's study, my hands shaking so violently I could barely hold the grant application I'd been pretending to read. By the time Leo emerged from the basement, his steps light and casual, I was sitting exactly as he'd left me, though my heart was still racing, a frantic drum against my ribs. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, appearing in the doorway with that familiar, charming smile that now seemed like a grotesque mask, a terrifying deception. "I didn't hear you come in." "I've been down here all evening, just finishing up a few last-minute calls for a client." "I've been here all evening," I replied, proud of how steady my voice sounded, how utterly normal. "I tried calling you at the office, but no one answered. Must have been when I stepped out for a quick dinner run," he said smoothly, a perfectly plausible lie. "Lost track of time reviewing the quarterly budget projections. Just wrapped up." Every word felt like another betrayal, another stab of deceit. He was lying to my face about where he'd been, about what he'd been doing, about everything. "How did the projections look?" I asked, testing him, forcing myself to engage in the charade. "Good. Mostly," he replied, moving behind my chair and beginning to massage my shoulders, a gesture that had always comforted me but now felt manipulative, sickening. "A few adjustments needed in the community development allocation, some shifting of funds, but nothing major. You've been working too hard lately, Eliza. Why don't you let me handle the evening reviews for a while? Give you a break." I wanted to scream, to confront him immediately, to unleash the torrent of rage and disgust I felt about what I'd just overheard. But something held me back. Maybe it was Dad's voice, a quiet whisper warning me to be careful, to be strategic. Maybe it was my own instinct for self-preservation, a desperate need to protect myself from the monster I had unwittingly married. Leo was clearly involved in something illegal, something that went far beyond mere financial misconduct, and he had an accomplice inside the trust itself, Bridget. If I confronted him now, without concrete proof, he'd simply deny everything, twist the narrative, and become far more careful about hiding his activities. He would make sure I looked like the erratic widow he'd implied I was. That sounds nice, I managed to say, forcing a weary sigh. I am pretty tired, actually. As Leo continued rubbing my shoulders, talking casually about his plans for tomorrow's meetings, about the exciting new initiatives he was developing for the trust, I felt like I was seeing him clearly for the first time in months, perhaps ever. The man I'd trusted with Dad's entire legacy, the husband I'd thought was supporting my dreams, was systematically stealing from the Sterling Trust, from countless deserving citizens, and lying to my face about it, with a chilling nonchalance. That night, I lay awake beside him, watching him sleep peacefully, his breathing even and deep, as if he hadn't a care in the world. Every breath, every slight movement, felt like another deception, another layer of betrayal. I thought about Dad's warning letter, about Arthur Blackwood's subtle concerns, about all the small, insidious signs I'd ignored or rationalized away over the past year and a half. By morning, a cold, hard resolve had settled within me. I had made a decision. I couldn't confront Leo directly. Not yet. But I could, and would, start my own investigation. I would gather every scrap of evidence, every damning detail, of whatever fraudulent scheme he was running with Marcus and Bridget, and then, only then, would I decide how to protect the Sterling Trust Dad had entrusted to me. The antique key pendant felt cold, heavy, against my throat as I watched the first sliver of sun rise through our bedroom window. Leo had given it to me as a symbol of partnership, of access to shared power. But now, I understood what it truly represented. The key to his plan to steal everything Dad had worked for. The key to my own destruction. But two could play at this game. If Leo thought I was naive about business, he was about to learn just how profoundly wrong he could be. DT. My covert investigation into Leo's activities began the very next morning. I arrived at the Sterling Trust office earlier than usual, feigning an unexpected burst of productivity, determined to review every single document Bridget Vance had filed in the past 6 months, especially those related to special projects and What I discovered, meticulously buried amidst routine quarterly reports and legitimate program updates, made my stomach turn, twisting into a tight, nauseating knot. Bridget had been busy, meticulously creating an elaborate fiction. Buried deep in the digital archives and physical folders were references to a downtown digital literacy outreach initiative that I'd never approved, never even heard of. According to her, meticulously crafted documentation, the Sterling Trust had been funding a pilot program providing mobile computer labs and literacy workshops to, underserved individuals in the downtown business district. Precisely the area where Marcus's tech startup, now identified as TechBridge Innovations, would logically want to establish a foothold for a future civic technology hub. The paperwork was flawless, almost artistic in its deception. Professional-looking photographs showed smiling volunteers distributing refurbished laptops and tablets to people I didn't recognize, all of them appearing grateful and engaged. Fabricated testimonials praised the program's effectiveness in connecting, digitally disenfranchised individuals with online resources and job training. Financial reports detailed exorbitant expenses for staff, supplies, transportation, and even mobile connectivity solutions, totaling nearly $300,000 over 6 months. None of it existed. I knew this with a sickening certainty because I personally, discreetly, visited every legitimate digital literacy provider and community outreach center in the city. None of them had ever heard of our downtown digital literacy outreach initiative. The supposed beneficiaries in the photographs were clearly stock images, easily found with a reverse Google search. The addresses listed for the mobile service locations were either vacant lots, abandoned storefronts, or the unlisted private parking garages of Marcus's fledgling startup. "Good morning, Eliza," Bridget's voice made me jump, startling me out of my grim discovery. I looked up to find her standing in my office doorway, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her impeccable business attire tailored to perfection, her professional smile not quite reaching her eyes. A chillingly familiar observation. "You're here early today. Catching up?" "Just catching up on some reading," I replied casually. forcing myself to close the file folder I'd been reviewing, trying to appear utterly unperturbed. I wanted to understand all our programs better. There are so many, it's hard to keep track of everything Leo's been rolling out. Bridget stepped into my office without invitation, her expensive heels clicking softly on the polished hardwood floor. She was younger than me by at least 5 years, with the kind of polished confidence that came from expensive schools, well-connected family, and, as I was now realizing, a complete lack of moral compass. When Leo had hired her, I'd been genuinely impressed by her credentials and her apparent passion for social justice and civic improvement. Now, I wondered if everything about her, her background, her enthusiasm, her very persona, was as fabricated as her program reports. "I noticed you've been pulling files on several of our community initiatives," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk, her gaze unwavering, almost challenging. "I'd be happy to brief you on any programs you have questions about, Eliza. Save you some time." The offer sounded helpful, even generous, but her tone carried a subtle, almost imperceptible undercurrent. I couldn't quite identify, was it a warning? A veiled threat? Or just a smug confidence that I wouldn't understand? "Actually, I was just reading about the Downtown Digital Literacy Outreach Initiative," I said, watching her face carefully, every subtle micro-expression. Impressive results for such a new program, truly groundbreaking. Bridget's smile never wavered, a mask of professional equanimity, but I caught a slight, almost imperceptible tightening around her eyes, a fleeting tension in her jaw. "Thank you, Eliza. It's been incredibly rewarding work. The underserved population in that area has such complex needs, and our mobile units have been a lifeline. I'd love to see the program in action," I continued, deciding to push a little harder, to see how far her carefully constructed facade would stretch. "Maybe I could join you on one of the mobile outreach visits next week? See the impact firsthand?" "Oh, that would be wonderful, Eliza," Bridget replied smoothly, her voice still perfectly composed. "Unfortunately, we just wrapped up the pilot phase last week. We're currently analyzing all the data before proposing the full-scale statewide implementation. Perfect timing, really, as we're preparing for the next board meeting." Of course they were. How incredibly convenient that the program had ended just as I'd started asking questions, just as my suspicions had begun to solidify. "I see Leo's been very supportive of your work," I said, deciding to delve into the personal connection, to see if I could rattle her. "He speaks very highly of your initiative, your dedication." "Leo's been an incredible mentor, Eliza," Bridget said, and something in the way she said his name, a lingering intimacy, a soft inflection, sent a sickening chill down my spine. "He really understands the importance of innovative approaches to persistent social problems to truly make an impact on a statewide level." There was an undeniable intimacy in her tone, an unspoken bond that went far beyond professional admiration. I thought about Leo's increasingly frequent late nights at the office, his phone calls that went straight to voicemail, his increasingly distracted and distant behavior at home. Was Bridget involved in more than just his fraudulent schemes? Was she the reason for his sudden work trips? For the strange new scent I sometimes caught on his clothes? The pieces were beginning to fit together, forming a horrifyingly clear picture. "Well, I'm glad you two are working so closely together," I managed to say, my voice a strained whisper. "We make a good team," she replied, standing to leave, her victory apparent in her posture. "Leo has such vision for where the trust could go, where civic innovation could truly lead. Sometimes the most impactful changes require flexibility in how we approach traditional philanthropy. A willingness to push boundaries, don't you think?" She turned and left my office, her heels clicking a rhythmic, mocking beat on the hardwood floor. After she left, I sat staring at the empty doorway, my hands shaking with a cold, focused rage. The audacity of it, discussing her conspiracy with my husband right in front of me, confident that I was too naive or trusting to understand what was happening, too broken by grief to question their elaborate lies. I spent the rest of the morning and most of the afternoon researching Marcus's tech startup. TechBridge Innovations LLC had been incorporated just 8 months ago, shortly after Leo became co-director of the Sterling Trust. Their only listed project was a proposed civic data solutions hub in the downtown business district, the exact area where Bridget's fictional outreach program had supposedly been operating. the same area targeted for Leo's Civic Innovation Grant. The timeline was damning. A perfectly orchestrated symphony of deception. Marcus forms a dubious tech startup. Leo, now co-director, pushes for strategic partnerships with civic technology initiatives. Bridget, his accomplice and mistress, creates fraudulent documentation to justify massive grants for fictional downtown digital literacy services. And soon, I was certain, there would be an application for a major civic innovation grant, millions of dollars, ostensibly to support community-responsive development that would primarily exclusively benefit Marcus's project, enriching them all. They had been planning this for months, perhaps even longer, using Dad's foundation, using me, to fund Leo's family business ventures, while meticulously hiding behind the veneer of charitable work, of civic improvement. When Leo arrived at the office that afternoon, he greeted me with his usual warm, reassuring smile and a fresh cup of my favorite coffee. "How's your day going, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice casual, almost bored. "I heard you were asking Bridget about some of our programs. Getting curious, are we?" The casual mention, the knowing tone, told me they'd already discussed my questions, my inquiries. They were coordinating their responses, making sure their stories aligned, presenting a united front of carefully constructed lies. "Just trying to stay more involved, Leo," I replied, my voice calm, almost placid. "You were right about needing to understand all our initiatives better. So much to learn." "I'm glad to hear it, Eliza," Leo said, though his eyes were watchful, scanning my face for any hint of suspicion. "Though I hope you're not taking on too much. You've seemed stressed lately, perhaps a little overwhelmed?" It was classic gaslighting, pure and simple. Make me question my own perceptions, my own instincts, my own right to oversee the foundation Dad had left to me. Make me believe I was losing my mind, not discovering their crimes. "I'm fine, Leo," I said firmly, meeting his gaze directly. "Actually, I'm thinking about doing some field visits, really seeing our programs in action. Firsthand, without all the reports." Leo's smile tightened almost imperceptibly, a fleeting flicker of alarm. "That sounds like a great idea, Eliza, though you know how much the program directors appreciate advance notice. Some of our beneficiaries can be sensitive about unexpected visitors. It's best to give them ample time to prepare, to ensure the best experience for everyone." Another smooth deflection. Another reason why I couldn't simply show up unannounced to verify their claims. They would simply make sure there was nothing to see. That evening, as Leo went through the motions of our usual pleasant dinner, I made a decision that would have seemed utterly impossible just days earlier. I was going to hire a private investigator. I was going to document Leo's activities, his calls, his movements, his secret meetings. I was going to gather enough irrefutable evidence to not only protect the Sterling Trust and Dad's legacy, but to potentially send my husband, the man I had loved and trusted for 15 years, to prison for fraud, for embezzlement, for betraying everything we supposedly stood for. As I lay in bed that night listening to Leo's steady, peaceful breathing beside me, I felt like I was mourning the death of my marriage, the brutal, violent end of a profound love. The man I'd loved and trusted for 13 years was gone, replaced by a stranger, a cold, calculating monster who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to overcome, a resource to exploit, a puppet to manipulate. The antique key pendant lay cold, heavy, against my throat, and I finally understood its true, horrifying meaning. Leo hadn't given me access to power. He'd given me the key to his grand scheme, the key to my own destruction. But what he didn't realize was that I still held the master key to everything Dad had built, to the true power of the Sterling Trust, and I intended to use it, to unlock a reckoning he could never have anticipated. My covert investigation into Leo's activities began the very next morning. I arrived at the Sterling Trust office earlier than usual, feigning an unexpected burst of productivity, determined to review every single document Bridget Vance had filed in the past 6 months, especially those related to special projects and community initiatives. What I discovered, meticulously buried amidst routine quarterly reports and legitimate program updates, made my stomach turn, twisting into a tight, nauseating knot. Bridget had been busy, meticulously creating an elaborate fiction. Buried deep in the digital archives and physical folders were references to a downtown digital literacy outreach initiative that I'd never approved, Never even heard of. According to her meticulously crafted documentation, the Sterling Trust had been funding a, quote, pilot program, providing mobile computer labs and literacy workshops to underserved individuals in the downtown business district. Precisely the area where Marcus's tech startup, now identified as, quote, TechBridge Innovations, would logically want to establish a foothold for a future civic technology hub. The paperwork was flawless, almost artistic in its deception. Professional-looking photographs showed smiling volunteers distributing refurbished laptops and tablets to people I didn't recognize, all of them appearing grateful and engaged. Fabricated testimonials praised the program's effectiveness in connecting digitally disenfranchised individuals with online resources and job training. Financial reports detailed exorbitant expenses for staff, supplies, transportation, and even mobile connectivity solutions, totaling nearly $300,000 over 6 months. None of it existed. I knew this with a sickening certainty because I personally, discreetly, visited every legitimate digital literacy provider and community outreach center in the city. None of them had ever heard of our downtown digital literacy outreach initiative. The supposed beneficiaries in the photographs were clearly stock images, easily found with a reverse Google search. The addresses listed for the mobile service locations were either vacant lots, abandoned storefronts, or the unlisted, private parking garages of Marcus's fledgling startup. "Good morning, Eliza," Bridget's voice made me jump, startling me out of my grim discovery. I looked up to find her standing in my office doorway, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her impeccable business attire tailored to perfection, her professional smile not quite reaching her eyes. A chillingly familiar observation. "You're here early today. Catching up?" "Just catching up on some reading," I replied casually, forcing myself to close the file folder I'd been reviewing, trying to appear utterly unperturbed. I wanted to understand all our programs better. There are so many, it's hard to keep track of everything Leo's been rolling out. Bridget stepped into my office without invitation, her expensive heels clicking softly on the polished hardwood floor. She was younger than me by at least 5 years, with the kind of polished confidence that came from expensive schools, well-connected family, and, as I was now realizing, a complete lack of moral compass. When Leo had hired her, I'd been genuinely impressed by her credentials and her apparent passion for social justice and civic improvement. Now, I wondered if everything about her, her background, her enthusiasm, her very persona, was as fabricated as her program reports. "I noticed you've been pulling files on several of our community initiatives," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk, her gaze unwavering, almost challenging. "I'd be happy to brief you on any programs you have questions about, Eliza. Save you some time." The offer sounded helpful, even generous, but her tone carried a subtle, almost imperceptible undercurrent. I couldn't quite identify. Was it a warning? A veiled threat? Or just a smug confidence that I wouldn't understand? "Actually, I was just reading about the Downtown Digital Literacy Outreach Initiative," I said, watching her face carefully, every subtle micro-expression. "Impressive results for such a new program. Truly groundbreaking." Bridget's smile never wavered, a mask of professional equanimity. But I caught a slight, almost imperceptible tightening around her eyes, a fleeting tension in her jaw. "Thank you, Eliza. It's been incredibly rewarding work. The underserved population in that area has such complex needs, and our mobile units have been a lifeline." "I'd love to see the program in action," I continued, deciding to push a little harder to see how far her carefully constructed facade would stretch. "Maybe I could join you on one of the mobile outreach visits next week. See the impact firsthand?" "Oh, that would be wonderful, Eliza." Bridget replied smoothly, her voice still perfectly composed. "Unfortunately, we just wrapped up the pilot phase last week. We're currently analyzing all the data before proposing the full-scale, statewide implementation. Perfect timing, really, as we're preparing for the next board meeting." Of course they were. How incredibly convenient that the program had ended just as I'd started asking questions, just as my suspicions had begun to solidify. "I see Leo's been very supportive of your work," I said, deciding to delve into the personal connection, to see if I could rattle her. He speaks very highly of your initiative, your dedication. Leo's been an incredible mentor, Eliza, Bridget said, and something in the way she said his name, a lingering intimacy, a soft inflection, sent a sickening chill down my spine. He really understands the importance of innovative approaches to persistent social problems, to truly make an impact on a statewide level. There was an undeniable intimacy in her tone, an unspoken bond that went far beyond professional admiration. I thought about Leo's increasingly frequent late nights at the office, his phone calls that went straight to voicemail, his increasingly distracted and distant behavior at home. Was Bridget involved in more than just his fraudulent schemes? Was she the reason for his sudden work trips, for the strange new scent I sometimes caught on his clothes? The pieces were beginning to fit together, forming a horrifyingly clear picture. "Well, I'm glad you two are working so closely together," I managed to say, my voice a strained whisper. "We make a good team," she replied, standing to leave, her victory apparent in her posture. Leo has such vision for where the trust could go, where civic innovation could truly lead. Sometimes the most impactful changes require flexibility in how we approach traditional philanthropy. A willingness to push boundaries, don't you think? She turned and left my office, her heels clicking a rhythmic, mocking beat on the hardwood floor. After she left, I sat staring at the empty doorway, my hands shaking with a cold, focused rage. The audacity of it. Discussing her conspiracy with my husband, right in front of me, confident that I was too naive or trusting to understand what was happening, too broken by grief to question their elaborate lies. I spent the rest of the morning and most of the afternoon researching Marcus's tech startup. TechBridge Innovations LLC had been incorporated just 8 months ago, shortly after Leo became co-director of the Sterling Trust. Their only listed project was a proposed civic data solutions hub in the downtown business district, the exact area where Bridget's fictional outreach program had supposedly been operating, the same area targeted for Leo's civic innovation grant. The timeline was damning. A perfectly orchestrated symphony of deception. Marcus forms a dubious tech startup. Leo, now co-director, pushes for strategic partnerships with civic technology initiatives. Bridget, his accomplice and mistress, creates fraudulent documentation to justify massive grants for fictional downtown digital literacy services. And soon, I was certain, there would be an application for a major civic innovation grant, millions of dollars, ostensibly to support community-responsive development that would primarily, exclusively, benefit Marcus's project, enriching them all. They had been planning this for months, perhaps even longer, using Dad's foundation, using me, to fund Leo's family business ventures, while meticulously hiding behind the veneer of charitable work, of civic improvement. When Leo arrived at the office that afternoon, he greeted me with his usual warm, reassuring smile and a fresh cup of my favorite coffee. "How's your day going, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice casual, almost bored. "I heard you were asking Bridget about some of our programs. Getting curious, are we?" The casual mention, the knowing tone, told me they'd already discussed my questions, my inquiries. They were coordinating their responses, making sure their stories aligned, presenting a united front of carefully constructed lies. "Just trying to stay more involved, Leo," I replied, my voice calm, almost placid. "You were right about needing to understand all our initiatives better, so much to learn." "I'm glad to hear it, Eliza," Leo said, though his eyes were watchful, scanning my face for any hint of suspicion. "Though I hope you're not taking on too much. You've seemed stressed lately. Perhaps a little overwhelmed?" It was classic gaslighting, pure and simple. Make me question my own perceptions, my own instincts, my own right to oversee the foundation Dad had left to me. Make me believe I was losing my mind, not discovering their crimes. "I'm fine, Leo," I said firmly, meeting his gaze directly. "Actually, I'm thinking about doing some field visits, really seeing our programs in action. Firsthand, you know, without all the reports." Leo's smile tightened, almost imperceptibly, a fleeting flicker of alarm. "That sounds like a great idea, Eliza, though you know how much the program directors appreciate advanced notice. Some of our beneficiaries can be sensitive about unexpected visitors." It's best to give them ample time to prepare, to ensure the best experience for everyone. Another smooth deflection. Another reason why I couldn't simply show up unannounced to verify their claims. They would simply make sure there was nothing to see. That evening, as Leo went through the motions of our usual pleasant dinner, I made a decision that would have seemed utterly impossible just days earlier. I was going to hire a private investigator. I was going to document Leo's activities, his calls, his movements, his secret meetings. I was going to gather enough irrefutable evidence to not only protect the Sterling Trust and Dad's legacy, but to potentially send my husband, the man I had loved and trusted for 15 years, to prison for fraud, for embezzlement, for betraying everything we supposedly stood for. As I lay in bed that night, listening to Leo's steady, peaceful breathing beside me, I felt like I was mourning the death of my marriage, the brutal, violent end of a profound love. The man I'd loved and trusted for 13 years was gone, replaced by a stranger, a cold, calculating monster who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to overcome, a resource to exploit, a puppet to manipulate. The antique key pendant lay cold, heavy, against my throat, and I finally understood its true, horrifying meaning. Leo hadn't given me access to power. He'd given me the key to his grand scheme, the key to my own destruction. But what he didn't realize was that I still held the master key to everything Dad had built, to the true power of the Sterling Trust, and I intended to use it, to unlock a reckoning he could never have anticipated. The private investigator I hired was a former police detective named David Chen. Professional, discreet, and highly recommended by Arthur Blackwood's law firm for sensitive family matters. He came with a reputation for unwavering integrity and a talent for uncovering the truth, no matter how deeply buried. Within 2 weeks, David had confirmed what I already suspected, and uncovered details that made Leo's betrayal even more complete, more devastating. Leo and Bridget weren't just business partners in crime, they were having an affair. David's surveillance photos, delivered in a thick, manila envelope, showed them entering hotels together, sharing intimate dinners at upscale restaurants across town, even looking at apartments in the expensive waterfront district. They weren't trying very hard to hide it, which told me they were confident I'd never find out, that I was too naive, too blinded by grief and misplaced trust to see the obvious. More damaging, however, were the financial records David had obtained through his contacts at the bank. Leo had opened personal accounts that I knew nothing about, accounts that received regular, substantial transfers from Sterling Trust grants allocated to those fictional programs. The money trail led directly to Marcus's tech startup, to Bridget's personal expenses, including designer clothes and a luxury car, and to a lifestyle that far exceeded what Leo's trust salary could support. But the most devastating discovery was the timeline. The affair had begun before Dad's death, before Leo had become my supportive partner, through grief. His transformation into the perfect husband hadn't been an act of love or personal growth. It had been a calculated performance, meticulously designed to position himself for this theft, for this complete takeover. I was studying David's report in Dad's old study, the weight of the evidence pressing down on me, when Leo appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable, a carefully constructed mask of concern. "We need to talk, Eliza," he said, closing the door behind him with a soft, ominous click. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage, as I casually slid the investigator's damning photos under a stack of grant applications, trying to appear utterly calm. "Of course, Leo. What about?" Leo sat across from me, his posture tense in a way I'd never seen before, his usual relaxed confidence replaced by a rigid, almost defensive stance. "I've been hearing some concerning things, Eliza. About you asking questions, making unusual phone calls to verify programs, pulling financial records that are well outside your purview. It's unsettling." "I'm the Sterling Trust Director, Leo," I replied, keeping my voice steady, my gaze unwavering. "Those are my responsibilities. I have a right to know where the money is going, how it's being used." "There are responsibilities, Eliza," Leo countered, his tone sharper than usual, a flicker of impatience in his eyes. "And frankly, your behavior is starting to concern the board. Several members have expressed reservations." I felt a chill run down my spine, a cold premonition of what was to come. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Leo leaned forward, his expression now sympathetic, almost pitying, but his eyes were cold, calculating. "Mr. Charles Sterling called me yesterday. He's worried about your mental state, Eliza. Your obsession with micromanaging every detail. Your apparent paranoia about perfectly legitimate programs. He thinks the stress of managing the trust might be affecting your judgment, clouding your decision-making." The manipulation was breathtaking. A masterclass in psychological warfare. Leo was using the board, people who had known and respected my father for decades, to gaslight me about my own competence, to undermine my authority, to paint me as unstable. "I'm not paranoid, Leo," I said carefully, forcing each word through a tight throat. "I'm being thorough. I'm doing my job. Are you Eliza?" Leo leaned forward, his voice taking on the patronizing tone I'd come to hate, the one that treated me like a child, a fragile doll. "Because Bridget mentioned you've been asking some very strange questions about the Downtown Digital Literacy Outreach Initiative. Questions that suggest you don't trust the documentation, don't trust her work, don't trust me." They were closing ranks, presenting a united front against my unreasonable suspicions, preparing the ground for a complete takeover. Soon I realized they'd have enough board support to have me declared incompetent to manage the trust, to strip me of my power, to silence me. "Maybe I should talk to the board myself," I suggested, my voice trembling slightly, but determined. Leo's smile was cold, almost triumphant. "I think that would be an excellent idea, Eliza. In fact, I've already scheduled a meeting for Friday afternoon. A chance for everyone to air their concerns, to discuss your recent behavior, and to work together towards solutions. A true intervention." My mouth went dry, a wave of nausea washing over me. A board meeting I hadn't scheduled, about concerns I wasn't supposed to know about, with outcomes already predetermined. This was how Leo intended to remove me entirely, not through direct confrontation, but through institutional manipulation, through a carefully orchestrated coup. "I see," I managed to say, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Eliza, I want you to know that despite everything," Leo continued, reaching across the desk to take my hand, his touch feeling like ice, a grotesque parody of intimacy, "I still care about you. The Sterling Trust was your father's life work, and I know how much it means to you. But maybe it's time to consider whether the stress is worth it, whether you might be happier stepping back, letting others handle the day-to-day operations. Others who are perhaps better suited to the task, others who can maintain professional objectivity, who can work collaboratively, instead of creating conflict and suspicion. Others like me and Bridget." Leo's mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw something truly predatory in his expression, a glimpse of the ruthless ambition that had driven him all along. He wasn't just after the money, he was after the power, the influence, the complete control. After he left, I sat staring at the closed door, finally understanding the full, horrifying scope of what I was facing. This wasn't just about money, or even the affair. Leo intended to steal the Sterling Trust entirely, to have me declared incompetent so he could run Dad's legacy as his personal slush fund, a vehicle for his own twisted vision of civic innovation. I called David Chen immediately, my voice urgent, desperate. "I need everything accelerated, David. Everything. Financial records, evidence of the affair, documentation of the fraudulent programs. And I need it before Friday, before that board meeting." "That's only 3 days, Mrs. Vance," David warned, his voice calm but concerned. "It's a lot to gather in such a short time." "Then we work fast, David," I replied, my voice hard, unwavering. "Because after Friday, it might be too late." The next 3 days passed in a blur of covert evidence gathering. I accessed Sterling Trust accounts from home, downloading crucial financial records and grant applications before Leo could restrict my access. I photographed documents, copied files, and assembled a comprehensive picture of the fraud that had been perpetrated right under my nose. Olivia called Wednesday evening, her voice tight with concern. "Eliza, I hope you don't mind me asking, but is everything okay with the trust?" Leo mentioned there might be some restructuring. My blood ran cold. He was already preparing our beneficiaries, the people we were supposed to be helping, for my departure, for his complete takeover. "What kind of restructuring, Olivia?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. "He wasn't specific," she said, "just said there might be changes in leadership, new priorities, different approaches to grant-making. It doesn't sound like the vision you shared with me when we started the DMV project, Eliza." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. Then Olivia said quietly, "Eliza, if you need anything at all, please call me. Your father was good to a lot of people in this city. We don't forget that kind of loyalty." Thursday night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about Dad, about his warning letter, about how he'd somehow known to protect the trust from external influences. He'd tried to safeguard his life's work, but I'd handed it over to the very person he'd warned me about. Friday morning arrived with unseasonable rain, a relentless downpour that mirrored the storm raging inside me. I dressed carefully, deliberately, in my most professional suit, the one Dad had always said made me look like a CEO. I clasped my mother's pearl necklace around my throat, a talisman of strength and resilience, leaving the antique key pendant Leo had given me on my dresser. I wouldn't be wearing his symbol of false partnership, his instrument of deception, to my own execution. The board meeting that would determine my fate was scheduled for 2 p.m. I had 6 hours to decide whether to fight or flee, to expose Leo's crimes and reclaim what was rightfully mine, or to accept defeat gracefully and walk away, leaving Dad's legacy to a man who would destroy it. By noon, I'd made my choice. If Leo wanted a war for control of Dad's foundation, he was going to get one. But he'd underestimated the woman he'd betrayed, just like he'd underestimated the father who'd raised her. The Sterling Trust was about to learn what happened when you tried to steal from a Sterling. The board meeting that would determine my fate was still 3 hours away when I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of waiting passively for Leo's carefully orchestrated ambush, I was going to confront him with the evidence I'd gathered. Not to save our marriage. That was already dead, a cold, decaying corpse. But to give him one last chance, to confess, to repent, before I destroyed him publicly, before I unleashed the full force of my righteous fury. I found Leo in his sprawling office, reviewing what looked like talking points for the afternoon meeting, his face calm, composed, utterly confident. When I walked in and closed the door firmly behind me, the sound echoing in the vast, opulent space, he looked up with that practiced smile that no longer fooled me, that now seemed like a grotesque mockery. "Eliza, sweetheart, I know about Marcus's tech startup, Leo," I said quietly, my voice devoid of emotion, a flat, chilling statement of fact. I placed David Chen's thick envelope of surveillance photos on his polished mahogany desk, the images stark and undeniable in the afternoon light. "I know about the fake downtown digital literacy outreach initiative. I know about the money you've been stealing from Dad's foundation." Leo's face went completely still, all color draining from his skin, as he stared at the photographs. Images of him and Bridget entering hotels, sharing intimate dinners, kissing in parking garages, a sordid catalog of his betrayal. When he finally looked up, the mask he'd worn for so long, the charming, supportive husband, was finally gone, replaced by a cold, calculating gaze. "How long have you known?" he asked, his voice flat, almost clinical. "Long enough," I replied, sitting in the chair across from him, surprised by how calm I felt, how utterly detached. "The question is, Leo, how long has this been going on?" A bitter, humorless laugh escaped him. "You really want to know, Eliza? You want the whole, sordid truth?" "I think I deserve the truth, don't you? After everything you've done." Another laugh, this one even more chilling. "The truth? The truth is that I've been planning this since before your father died." The words hit me like a physical blow, a punch to the gut, even though I'd suspected as much, even though a part of me had known, deep down. Do you think it was a coincidence that I happened to be so supportive during your grief, so helpful with the funeral arrangements, so eager to assist with the foundation? It was all carefully orchestrated, Eliza, a long con. You knew Dad was sick? I whispered, my voice barely audible, a strangled sound. You knew he was dying, and you… I prepared, Leo interrupted, his voice devoid of any remorse, any hint of emotion. I positioned myself to be indispensable to his grieving daughter. I became the perfect husband, the ideal partner, the man you could lean on when the world collapsed around you. It was remarkably easy, actually. And Bridget? I asked, the name a bitter taste on my tongue. You and Bridget were all ready. Bridget was always part of the picture, darling, Leo said, his voice almost admiring. We met at a conference 2 years ago, a conference on innovative philanthropy. How ironic. We started the arrangement about 6 months before your father's convenient death. She was getting her master's in nonprofit management. Perfect credentials for what we had planned. I felt sick, a wave of nausea washing over me. Every moment of comfort Leo had provided, every gesture of support, every word of encouragement, had been a calculated manipulation, a carefully crafted lie. The co-directorship was always the goal, Leo continued, seemingly almost relieved to finally tell the truth, to shed the burdensome pretense. Your father's will was ironclad. I couldn't touch the sterling trust as your husband. But as co-director, well, you signed away quite a bit of control, didn't you, Eliza? Why? The question came out as barely a whisper, a plea for some semblance of humanity. Why do this to me? To Dad's legacy? To all those people who depend on the trust? Leo's expression grew genuinely puzzled, as if the question didn't make any sense, as if my outrage was utterly incomprehensible. $30 million, Eliza, he said, his voice almost incredulous. Do you have any idea what that kind of money can do? The opportunities it opens up, the life it can buy. It's transformative. It's not your money, Leo, I shouted, finally losing my carefully constructed composure. It belongs to the people Dad wanted to help. It's meant to improve lives, to serve the community. Your father was a sentimental fool, Eliza, Leo snapped, his composure finally cracking, the predatory gleam returning to his eyes. All that money wasted on community centers and public libraries, on people who will never contribute anything meaningful to society. I saw the potential for something bigger, something that could actually generate wealth, not just give it away, something that could build an empire. You mean something that could generate wealth for you? I corrected, my voice dripping with scorn. For us, Eliza, Leo corrected, a flicker of his old charm returning, his voice almost seductive. At least, it could have been. If you'd been smarter, if you'd been willing to see the bigger picture, instead of clinging to your father's outdated idealism, we could have been unstoppable. We could have built something truly magnificent. Built on lies and fraud, I countered, standing up, no longer able to sit in the same room with him, my disgust palpable. Built on the backs of the people Dad dedicated his life to helping. Vision, Eliza, Leo said, his voice hardening again, all pretense of affection gone. Opportunity. Those people are a drain on resources that could be used productively, strategically. We could have leveraged that money for actual growth, for real power, instead of wasting it on charity. You're talking about destroying everything Dad built, I exclaimed, my voice rising. I'm talking about evolving it, Eliza, Leo replied, his tone dismissive, almost bored. Making it relevant to the modern world, instead of some Victorian notion of noblesse oblige. This state is ripe for innovation, for strategic investment in technology and infrastructure. We could have been at the forefront of that, shaping the future. I stood up, no longer able to listen to his twisted justifications, his warped vision of progress. This conversation is over, Leo. Is it? Leo's voice stopped me as I reached for the door handle, a chillingly calm threat. Because in about 2 hours, you're going to walk into that boardroom, where Mr. Sterling and the others are waiting to hear about your mental breakdown, your paranoid accusations, your inability to handle the pressures of leadership. And they're going to believe me, Eliza, not you. I turned back to face him, my heart pounding but my resolve hardening. Not anymore, Leo. Things have changed. Leo's smile was patronizing, almost pitying. Oh, but I think so, Eliza. You've always been too trusting, too naive about how power really works. That's what made this so easy. You were the perfect mark. As I reached for the door handle again, determined to end this charade, to unleash the truth, Leo spoke one more time, his voice a venomous whisper. Oh, and sweetheart? You might want to know that after the board removes you this afternoon, Bridget and I have already planned our honeymoon. We're thinking the Maldives. Your father's foundation will be paying for it, of course. I walked out without another word, slamming the door behind me with a force that rattled the framed photos on the wall. But inside I was burning with a cold, focused rage that would have made Dad proud, a righteous fury that would consume everything in its path. Leo thought he'd won. He thought I was still the naive, trusting woman he'd married. He was about to learn just how wrong he could be. What happened next should have been my complete destruction, the culmination of Leo's meticulously crafted plan. Instead, it became the moment I realized that Leo had made one critical, fatal miscalculation. He'd assumed I would react like the grieving, trusting woman he'd manipulated for the past 18 months. He had no idea that his confession, his arrogance, had awakened something in me that I'd inherited from Dad, a steel core of unwavering resolve that emerged only when everything I loved was threatened. I left Leo's office with 90 minutes to spare before the board meeting that was supposed to end my involvement with the Sterling Trust, to erase my father's legacy. Instead of panicking, instead of preparing for defeat, I spent that time making phone calls to people Leo didn't know I could reach, to allies he hadn't anticipated. The first call was to Arthur Blackwood. I need you at the Sterling Trust board meeting this afternoon, Arthur, I told him, my voice calm but urgent. As legal counsel for the original estate and the foundation charter, your presence is crucial. Eliza? I don't understand, Arthur replied, his voice confused. Leo told me the meeting was cancelled, that it was unnecessary. Leo lied. Arthur, I said, my voice hard. He's been lying about a great many things. Can you be here by 2 p.m.? It's imperative. There was a pause, a moment of stunned silence. Then, yes, Eliza, of course. Should I bring anything specific? Dad's original foundation documents, I said, and the addendum he added 6 months before his death. The one about the moral conduct clauses. It's time to invoke them. The second call was to David Chen. I need you at the Sterling Trust headquarters at 1:45 p.m., David. Bring everything. Photos, financial records, the complete evidence file. I'm going to need to present it to the board. Are you sure about this, Mrs. Vance? David asked, his voice professional but laced with concern. Once this comes out, there's no going back. It will be explosive. There was no going back the moment my husband decided to steal from dying children and homeless families, David. I replied, my voice unwavering. I'm prepared for the fallout. The third call was the hardest, the most emotionally fraught. I dialed Olivia Thompson's direct line at the DMV, my hands trembling slightly. Olivia, I need to ask you something important. Has anyone from the Sterling Trust contacted you about changes to our funding arrangement? To the DMV modernization project? Actually, yes, Eliza, Olivia replied, her voice tight with worry. Bridget Vance called yesterday. She said there might be some restructuring of grants, possibly reducing our allocation by 60% starting next quarter. She mentioned budget constraints and new priorities. My jaw clenched, a surge of icy fury coursing through me. They were already planning to cut funding to legitimate programs, to cripple the very initiatives Dad had championed, to cover the money they'd stolen and intended to steal. Olivia, I need you to trust me, I said, my voice urgent. Can you be at the Sterling Trust office at 2 p.m. today? I can't explain everything over the phone, but I need witnesses to what's about to happen. Witnesses to the truth about what's been happening to Dad's foundation. There was silence on the other end of the line, a moment of stunned hesitation. Then, Olivia said quietly, Eliza, if you need anything at all, I'll be there. Your father was good to this city. We don't forget that kind of generosity. When I arrived at the boardroom 15 minutes before the scheduled meeting, I found Mr. Charles Sterling and 3 other board members already seated, looking uncomfortable, almost apprehensive. Leo was there too, standing near the window, along with Bridget, both wearing expressions of professional concern mixed with barely concealed satisfaction. They thought they had me cornered, outmaneuvered. They were about to learn how wrong they were. "Eliza," Mr. Sterling said, rising to greet me, his face etched with worry. "Thank you for coming. I know this is difficult, but we all care about you, and we want what's best for the Sterling Trust." "I appreciate that, Mr. Sterling," I replied, my voice calm, almost serene. "I hope you'll keep that in mind during today's discussion." Leo checked his watch with theatrical concern, a smug smile playing on his lips. "Should we begin? I know everyone has busy schedules." "Actually, we're waiting for a few more people, Leo," I said, taking my seat at the head of the long mahogany table, the chair that had been my father's, the position Leo had been systematically trying to undermine. "Our legal counsel for one, and several Sterling Trust stakeholders who have a right to hear what we're discussing today." Bridget's carefully composed face paled slightly, a flicker of alarm in her eyes. "More people?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral, but her gaze sharp, suspicious. The conference room door opened, and Arthur Blackwood entered, carrying a thick briefcase and wearing the gravely serious expression I remembered from Dad's funeral. Behind him came David Chen, his presence commanding immediate attention, followed by Olivia Thompson, her face set with a grim determination. "What is the meaning of this, Eliza?" Mr. Sterling demanded, looking between Leo and me, utterly bewildered. "The meaning, Mr. Sterling," I said, standing up, my voice ringing with a newfound authority, "is that this board has been systematically deceived about the Sterling Trust's operations, its finances, and the true character of its co-director." Bridget had gone ashen, her carefully applied makeup failing to conceal her fear. But Leo, ever the master manipulator, maintained his composure, his smile a forced, desperate attempt at control. "Mr. Sterling, this is exactly what I was concerned about," he said, stepping forward, trying to regain the narrative. "Eliza has been making increasingly erratic accusations, unfounded claims about fraudulent programs," I interrupted, my voice cutting through his carefully constructed lies like a knife. I placed David Chen's surveillance photos on the table, the stark images speaking for themselves. About embezzled funds, about affairs conducted with trust employees. I spread the photos across the polished wood surface, a damning visual testament to Leo's betrayal. About conspiracies to steal money meant for homeless children and dying cancer patients. The silence in the room was deafening, a stunned silence of disbelief and dawning horror. Mr. Sterling picked up one of the photos, showing Leo and Bridget kissing outside a hotel, his face registering shock and disgust. These are faked," Leo said, but his voice lacked conviction, his carefully constructed facade beginning to crumble. "Are they, Leo?" I turned to David Chen, my voice calm, but commanding. "Mr. Chen, would you please explain to the board how you obtained these photographs, and the methods you used to verify their authenticity?" David stepped forward, his professional demeanor commanding immediate attention. "I am a licensed private investigator, Mr. Sterling. These photographs were taken over a 2-week period, using standard surveillance techniques. I can provide detailed logs of dates, times, and locations for each image, as well as digital timestamps and metadata to verify their authenticity. There is no question of their veracity." Board member Mrs. Evelyn Hayes was examining the financial documents I'd provided, her face pale. "Eliza, what am I looking at here?" Evidence that the Downtown Digital Literacy Outreach Initiative, which the Sterling Trust supposedly funded to the tune of $300,000, never existed, I said, my voice ringing with righteous anger. "The beneficiaries in the program reports are stock photos. The addresses are vacant lots. Every penny went to personal accounts controlled by Leo and Bridget." Olivia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "That's impossible. Leo told me that program was one of your most successful initiatives, a model for civic engagement." "Leo told you a lot of things, Olivia," I replied, my gaze locking with hers, a shared understanding passing between us, "including that the Sterling Trust was planning to cut your funding by 60%, to cripple the DMV modernization project you've worked so hard on." For the first time, Leo For the first time, Leo looked genuinely rattled, his confident facade cracking under the weight of the undeniable evidence. "You can't prove any of this," he stammered, his voice losing its smooth assurance. "I have lawyers. Resources. Can't I?" I nodded to Arthur Blackwood, who opened his briefcase and removed a thick legal document. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur announced, his voice carrying the authority of 40 years practicing law, "I hold in my hands a moral conduct addendum to the original Sterling Trust Charter, signed by Frank Sterling 6 months before his death. This addendum specifically states that any trust director found to have engaged in fraud, embezzlement, or breach of fiduciary duty shall be immediately removed and subject to full criminal prosecution, as well as forced restitution of all misappropriated funds." Leo shot to his feet, his face contorted with rage. "This is ridiculous!" "You can't." "Sit down, Leo," Mr. Sterling commanded, his voice thunderous, echoing through the boardroom. The mild-mannered businessman who'd been Dad's golf partner for 20 years was gone, replaced by someone I'd never seen before, a man whose fury was palpable. "Sit down and shut up while we figure out how badly you've damaged this institution, this legacy that Frank built with his heart and soul." As Leo sank back into his chair, his shoulders slumped in defeat, I felt Dad's presence in the room as clearly as if he were standing right behind me. All those warnings about external influences, all those carefully crafted legal protections. He'd known something like this might happen. He'd prepared for it. But what Leo and Bridget didn't know yet was that this confrontation was only the beginning. The real reckoning was still to come. What happened in the next hour was the systematic dismantling of Leo's carefully constructed facade. One by one, I presented the evidence David Chen had gathered, painting a picture so damning that even Leo couldn't spin it. The board sat in stunned silence as David detailed his surveillance findings. Arthur Blackwood explained the intricate legal implications of the moral conduct clause, and Olivia Thompson, her voice filled with quiet indignation, described the lies Leo had told her about trust priorities, about the planned funding cuts to the DMV. "The most egregious discovery," I announced, opening the final folder, my voice firm and unwavering, "is this." I placed a document on the table that made Leo's face go ashen, his last vestiges of composure crumbling. It was a formal proposal from Marcus's TechBridge Innovations, LLC, for a joint venture with the Sterling Trust, a proposal that would have essentially transferred $15 million in trust assets to Leo's brother's company under the guise of civic technology development and strategic infrastructure upgrades. Mr. Sterling examined the document, his disgust evident. This would have bankrupted our legitimate programs. It would have utterly destroyed Frank's life's work. "That was the plan, Mr. Sterling," I said, meeting his horrified gaze. "Phase out actual charitable work, use Dad's foundation as a money laundering operation for personal enrichment, and then divert the remaining assets." Leo finally erupted, his carefully maintained composure completely shattered. "You self-righteous hypocrite," he snarled, his eyes blazing with hatred. "You act like you're some kind of saint, but you're just another rich girl playing with Daddy's money. You have no idea what real business requires, what actual success looks like." The room fell silent at his outburst, stunned by the raw, unadulterated fury in his voice. This was the real Leo, the man who'd hidden behind charm and manipulation, finally revealed in all his entitled rage. "Real business?" I stood up, my voice deadly calm, cutting through his tirade. "You mean stealing from community centers, defrauding public services, lying to your own wife while planning to abandon her for your accomplice?" Bridget spoke for the first time, her voice shaking. "Leo, stop! Just stop talking!" But Leo was beyond reason now. Years of hidden resentment, of perceived slights poured out of him. "You want to know the truth? Your father was a naive fool who wasted millions on people who can't be helped. Digital illiterates. Small businesses that will never grow. It was all useless, sentimental nonsense. Throwing money at problems that can't be solved instead of building something lasting, something profitable." Mrs. Hayes slammed her hand on the table, her face crimson with anger. Frank Sterling was one of the most respected philanthropists in this state. How dare you? Frank Sterling was dead weight. Leo spat, glaring at her, completely unhinged. Just like his precious daughter, who thinks she can run a foundation based on feelings instead of facts. The sheer cruelty of it, attacking Dad's cherished memory in front of people who'd loved and respected him, finally broke something in me. But instead of tears or rage, I felt an ice-cold clarity settle over me, a profound, unwavering resolve. "You're right about one thing, Leo," I said quietly, my voice ringing with a chilling finality. Dad was generous to a fault. He believed in second chances, in rehabilitation, in the fundamental dignity of every human being, regardless of their circumstances. I paused, letting my words sink in, letting them hang heavy in the air. Which is precisely why I'm not going to give you the same mercy you'd show his memory, or the people he dedicated his life to helping. I turned to Arthur Blackwood. "Arthur, please file full criminal charges. Fraud, embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty. Everything you can. And initiate immediate proceedings to freeze all his assets, including those hidden accounts." "Eliza," Mr. Sterling began, a plea in his voice. "Perhaps we should handle this quietly, internally." "No." My voice cut through the room like a blade, sharp and decisive. "Dad taught me that sunshine is the best disinfectant. The community deserves to know how their trust was betrayed. The citizens who rely on the Sterling Trust deserve transparency, not a quiet cover-up." Leo's face had gone gray, his eyes wide with dawning horror, as he finally grasped the full weight of my intent. "You can't prove anything in court," he blustered, a desperate, pathetic attempt to regain control. "I have lawyers, resources." "You have stolen money and falsified records, Leo," I corrected, my gaze fixed on him, unflinching. "And now you have a very public scandal that will follow you for the rest of your miserable life." As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text. I glanced at it and, for the first time all day, a small, grim smile touched my lips. "Oh, and Leo," I said, my voice calm, almost conversational. "Remember that reporter from the City Sentinel who's been following the Sterling Trust stories? She just texted me. Apparently, she's downstairs in the lobby right now. Something about an anonymous tip regarding financial irregularities. She's quite eager for a statement." The color drained completely from Leo's face, as he realized that his humiliation was about to become very, very public. His carefully constructed life, his entire fraudulent empire, was about to come crashing down. The emergency board meeting ended with Leo and Bridget's immediate termination from all positions within the Sterling Trust, and a unanimous vote to pursue full criminal prosecution. But as the last board member filed out of the conference room, their faces grim with shock and disgust, I knew the real work was just beginning. Leo's theft had been more extensive than even I had realized, a vast, insidious web, and I needed to understand the full scope of the damage before I could begin the painstaking process of rebuilding, of restoring Dad's legacy to its former glory. That night, alone in the Sterling Trust office, surrounded by the silent echoes of the day's explosive revelations, I began the methodical process of unraveling 18 months of systematic fraud. What I discovered was breathtaking in its audacity, its sheer contempt for human decency. Leo hadn't just stolen money. He'd created an entire shadow foundation, complete with fake beneficiaries, fabricated programs, and a sophisticated network of shell companies that all led back to his personal accounts and Marcus's dubious ventures. The Downtown Digital Literacy Outreach Initiative was just the tip of the iceberg. I found evidence of a non-existent rural connectivity program that had supposedly received $250,000, a fictional veterans vocational training project that had consumed $400,000, and a completely fabricated STEM scholarship fund that had been bleeding $75,000 quarterly, all into their pockets. Every single program sounded legitimate, complete with professional-looking documentation and glowing testimonials from people who simply didn't exist. The financial records revealed countless transfers to accounts I'd never authorized, credit cards I'd never seen, and expenses for everything from luxury vacations to high-end jewelry, all brazenly charged to the Sterling Trust's operational budget. Leo had been living like a millionaire, financing his affair and his brother's failed businesses, all on money meant for underprivileged students, struggling veterans, and essential public services. But the most devastating discovery came when I cross-referenced the trust's beneficiary database with actual service providers, with the real people on the ground. Nearly 40% of our supposed grant recipients were fictional organizations that existed only on paper, with addresses that led to empty office buildings or mail forwarding services. The scale of the deception was staggering, a monumental betrayal of trust. I called David Chen at midnight, my voice hoarse from hours of relentless document review. "I need you to expand the investigation, David. This goes deeper than we thought. Much deeper." "How much deeper, Mrs. Vance?" he asked, his tone grave. "Leo's been stealing from the Cudge Sterling Trust for at least 2 years, I said, a cold certainty in my voice. "Perhaps longer. The fraud is systemic, sophisticated, and ongoing. We're looking at potential losses of well over $3 million, possibly more once we fully trace everything." David whistled low, a sound of grim understanding. "That's federal territory, Mrs. Vance. Wire fraud, mail fraud, racketeering. If we can prove the conspiracy angle, Leo and his accomplices are looking at serious time." "Can you document everything?" I asked, my voice hard, unwavering. "Build a case that's absolutely bulletproof with the evidence you've already gathered?" "Absolutely," David replied. "But Eliza, you need to understand what you're unleashing. A case this size will attract serious attention. Federal investigators, national media coverage, intense public scrutiny. Are you prepared for that level of exposure?" I thought about Dad, about his unwavering commitment to transparency and accountability, about the legitimate beneficiaries who'd been denied crucial funding because Leo had so cruelly diverted their grants to his personal accounts, about Olivia and the citizens who would have lost out on essential DMV services if Leo's plan had succeeded. "More than prepared, David," I said, my voice resolute. "I want him destroyed. Professionally, personally, financially. I want Leo Vance to understand exactly what it feels like to lose everything. Every last thing he cares about." The next morning, I made the call that would change everything, that would seal Leo's fate. Not to the local police, not to the district attorney, but directly to the FBI's white-collar crime division. Leo had made one fatal mistake. He'd used interstate banking systems to move the stolen money, making it a federal case. Special Agent Sarah Chen, a no-nonsense investigator with a sharp mind and an even sharper gaze, arrived at the Sterling Trust office within hours, accompanied by a team of forensic accountants who immediately began the painstaking process of documenting every fraudulent transaction, every hidden account, every stolen penny. Watching them work, the quiet, methodical efficiency of justice, I felt a grim satisfaction. Leo had underestimated me from the beginning, assuming I was too naive and trusting to fight back effectively. He was about to learn that underestimating a Sterling was the most expensive mistake he'd ever made. The FBI investigation moved faster than I'd expected. Within a week, agents had frozen Leo's accounts, seized his computers, and begun unraveling the complex web of financial fraud he'd constructed. But Leo himself remained free on bail, a ticking time bomb. And according to David Chen's continued surveillance, he was planning something desperate. "He's been making calls to offshore banks, Mrs. Vance," David reported during our morning briefing. "And yesterday, he met with a travel agent. I think he's planning to run, to flee the country." Special Agent Chen nodded grimly. "Flight risk is always a concern in white-collar cases. We could move to revoke his bail, but we'd need more evidence of imminent flight, a concrete plan." I had a better idea, a final poetic trap. "What if we gave him a reason to stay?" I asked, a dark idea forming in my mind. Something he couldn't possibly resist. That afternoon, I called Leo's cell phone directly. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice weary but trying desperately to maintain his old, smooth confidence. "Eliza? I was wondering when you'd call. We need to talk." "Face to face, Leo," I said, my voice carefully controlled, laced with a vulnerability I didn't feel. I don't think that's advisable, Eliza. My lawyer says. Your lawyer doesn't know about the overseas accounts, Leo, I interrupted, letting the lie hang in the air, a tempting lure. The ones in the Cayman Islands that the FBI hasn't found yet. The millions you moved there. Or the other accounts, the ones in Switzerland. There was a long, stunned silence on his end. Then, a desperate whisper. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you don't, I countered, allowing a hint of my old, trusting persona to seep into my voice. Just like you don't know about the safety deposit box in Marcus's name, or the bearer bonds you've been hiding in your mother's house. I was improvising now, throwing out educated guesses, but Leo's sharp intake of breath told me I'd hit close to something very, very real. What do you want, Eliza? He asked finally, his voice raw with desperation. To make a deal, Leo, I replied, channeling every ounce of the broken, desperate wife he'd once manipulated. Meet me tonight at the Sterling Trust office. 9 p.m. Come alone, and we can discuss terms that might keep you out of federal prison, that might give us a way out of this together. Why would you help me, Eliza? He asked, his suspicion warring with a glimmer of hope. I let my voice crack slightly, channeling the heartbroken woman he'd thought he'd married. Because, Leo, despite everything, I still love you. And maybe there's a way we can work this out together. Start over, disappear. It was exactly what Leo wanted to hear. That I was still the naive, emotional woman who could be manipulated by appeals to our shared history, our past love. His relief was audible through the phone, a desperate gasp of hope. 9 o'clock, he agreed, his voice almost eager. But Eliza, if this is some kind of trap. It's not, Leo, I lied smoothly. I just want my husband back. After I hung up, Special Agent Chen looked at me with a mixture of admiration and concern. You sure you want to do this, Mrs. Vance? If he's desperate enough to run, he might be dangerous. Unpredictable. He won't hurt me, I said with a confidence I didn't entirely feel, but knew I had to project. Leo's a coward and a thief. But he's not violent. Besides, Agent Chen, you'll be listening to every single word. And you'll have your team ready. That evening, I arrived at the Sterling Trust office early to help the FBI technicians set up recording equipment. They'd wired the conference room with cameras and microphones sensitive enough to pick up a whisper, hidden cleverly within the ornate light fixtures and behind the heavy drapes. Agent Chen and her team would be positioned in the building across the street, ready to move in at my signal or if anything went wrong. At exactly 9 p.m., I heard Leo's key in the front door. He still had access. I deliberately not changed the locks, knowing this moment would come, this final dramatic confrontation. His footsteps echoed ominously in the empty hallway as he made his way to the conference room, the very room where our marriage had effectively ended just days earlier. When he appeared in the doorway, I was struck by how much he'd aged in such a short time. The confident, charming man I'd known was gone, replaced by someone who looked hunted, desperate, his expensive suit rumpled, his hair disheveled. Hello, Leo, I said softly, standing at the head of the table. Thank you for coming. Leo entered the conference room cautiously, his eyes scanning every shadow, every corner, for threats that weren't visible, not yet. He looked haggard, his usually perfect appearance disheveled, his confident posture replaced by the hunched shoulders of a man under siege. You look terrible, I said, gesturing to the chair where he'd once sat as my equal partner, where he'd charted his course of betrayal. Prison will do that to a person's appearance, Leo, even the prospect of it. He flinched, but he sat down across from me, his gaze wary. It doesn't have to come to that, Leo, I said, maintaining the facade of the broken, desperate wife, dangling the bait. We could disappear together, start over somewhere new, a place where no one knows us. No one knows about this. Leo's eyes sharpened with interest, a flicker of his old greed, but also suspicion. The FBI has frozen everything, Eliza. My accounts, the house, even my mother's retirement fund. How exactly do you propose we finance this romantic escape? You're not exactly liquid, are you? I leaned forward conspiratorially, my voice dropping to a whisper, as if sharing a deep secret. The Sterling Trust has emergency funds that aren't in the main accounts, Leo. Untraceable cash reserves, Dad, set up years ago for crisis situations. Nearly $500,000 that the government doesn't know exists. Millions, in fact, spread out, hidden. It was a complete fabrication, a masterpiece of a lie. But Leo's insatiable greed, his desperate hope for a way out, made him want to believe it, need to believe it. I could see him calculating, weighing the impossible possibility against the crushing risks he now faced. "Where?" he asked, his voice hoarse, almost desperate. "Safety deposit boxes," I whispered back. "Multiple banks, small amounts in each to avoid detection. Offshore accounts the FB I would never find." I pulled out a piece of paper with fake bank names and box numbers I'd invented on the fly. A meticulously crafted fantasy map to his freedom. "Dad taught me to always have an escape plan, Leo. For any eventuality." Leo reached for the paper, his fingers trembling, but I held it back. "First, Leo, I need to know everything. All of it. The overseas accounts, Marcus's involvement, Bridget's precise role. I need to understand exactly what we're really running from. Every last detail. If we're going to disappear, I need to know the full extent of our shared predicament." And just like that, Leo began confessing, pouring out every sordid detail, every meticulous step of his elaborate scheme. Not out of remorse, not out of love, but out of naked self-interest, and the desperate, foolish belief that I was offering him salvation, a way out. He detailed the entire elaborate scheme, the precise timeline of his deception, the specific methods he'd used to hide the stolen money, the names of the shell companies, the false paper trails, the extent of Marcus's and Bridget's involvement. "The Cayman accounts have about $800,000, he admitted, his voice barely a whisper, a stream of damning information. "Marcus's company was just a front, Eliza. We were planning to liquidate everything through foreign real estate investments. Bridget had contacts in Switzerland who could have cleaned the money completely, made it untraceable." "And the timeline, Leo?" I pressed, my voice deceptively soft. "When did you start planning this, exactly?" Leo's smile was cold, chilling, utterly devoid of warmth. "The day I realized your father was dying, Eliza. Heart disease runs in his family. I did my research. I knew he wouldn't last 5 years, so I started positioning myself. Bridget and I met at a conference on nonprofit management. She was already running similar scams on smaller foundations. She's got a talent for it. Creating fake documentation, establishing paper organizations, manipulating grieving widows," his voice carried a note of admiration for Bridget's criminal ingenuity that made my skin crawl. A final, sickening confirmation of his utter depravity. "And if we leave tonight," he said, his eyes gleaming with a manic hope, "they'll never find us. With the right preparation, non-extradition countries, new identities, offshore funds they can't trace, we could live very well, Eliza. Better than we ever did playing by your father's antiquated rules." "There's just one problem with your plan, Leo," I said, my voice suddenly ice-cold, stripped of all pretense. Leo's expression shifted, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. "What problem, Eliza?" I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that didn't reach my eyes, and looked directly at the hidden camera behind his chair. An almost imperceptible nod. "You're already in prison, Leo. You just don't know it yet." The color drained from his face, leaving it ashen, cadaverous, as understanding dawned, as the horrifying realization of my betrayal of his capture slammed into him. "What did you?" he stammered, his voice choked with dawning terror. The conference room door burst open, and FBI agents flooded in, weapons drawn, their faces grim, their movements precise. Special Agent Chen stepped forward, handcuffs dangling from her hand. "Leo Vance," she announced, her voice clear and authoritative, "you're under arrest for multiple counts of wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to commit embezzlement, and obstruction of justice. Everything you've just confessed has been recorded." As they cuffed him, Leo looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred, his eyes blazing with a venomous fury. "You lying bitch! You played me!" "I learned from the best, Leo," I replied calmly, my voice steady, my gaze unwavering. "You taught me everything I needed to know about deception. and underestimating a sterling is the most expensive mistake you'll ever make. The next few weeks unfolded like dominoes falling in perfect, satisfying sequence. Leo's recorded confession, combined with the extensive evidence David Chen had meticulously gathered, led to the immediate arrest of Marcus Thorne and the seizure of Tech Bridge Innovations LLC's assets. Bridget Vance, facing federal charges and the prospect of decades in prison, quickly turned state's evidence, providing investigators with intricate details of similar schemes she'd run at 3 other foundations across the country. But it was the media coverage that truly delivered the comprehensive justice I'd been seeking, the public humiliation Leo had so readily inflicted upon others. The City Sentinel's investigative series titled, "The Sterling Trust Scandal: How a Philanthropic Legacy Was Almost Stolen," ran for 6 consecutive days, detailing every aspect of Leo's elaborate betrayal. Photos of him in handcuffs, sobbing uncontrollably as he was led to a federal detention center, became front-page news across the state. The man who'd spent months calculating how to humiliate me, how to dismantle my father's reputation, was now experiencing public shame on a scale he'd never imagined possible, a devastating reversal of fortune. After the press conference, I returned to the DMV, the very place that had unknowingly played such a crucial symbolic role in my story, the site of Leo's pathetic abandonment. Olivia was waiting in her newly expanded office, the same space where I'd first revealed my identity as the anonymous donor. "So," she said with a warm smile, her eyes twinkling, "I guess this means you're not planning to apply for a position in our customer service division permanently?" I laughed, a genuine, unburdened laugh, perhaps the first I'd had in months. "No, Olivia, I think I'll stick to funding the improvements rather than processing the licenses." "Any regrets about how you handled things, now that it's all out in the open?" I considered the question seriously, thoughtfully. "Only one, Olivia. I regret trusting Leo with Dad's legacy in the first place. But sometimes, I've learned, we have to lose everything to truly understand what's worth fighting for. And what's worth saving." 6 months later, I stood once again at the entrance of the DMV, the symbol of my public return, and a testament to the power of integrity. But this time, I wasn't clutching a flimsy purse and broken dreams. Today marked the grand opening of the DMV's new Mobile Services Unit, the very project Leo had so cruelly blocked when he was sabotaging Olivia's proposals, claiming it was inefficient. The irony wasn't lost on me. The money Leo had stolen and hidden in offshore accounts had been fully recovered by the FBI and meticulously returned to the Sterling Trust. That recovered money, combined with a flood of new donations that poured in after the sensational media coverage of our story, had allowed us to expand the Trust's reach and the DMV's services far beyond even Dad's original vision. "Ready for the ribbon cutting, Eliza?" Olivia asked, appearing beside me with a gleaming pair of golden scissors, her smile wide with pride. "More than ready, Olivia," I replied, looking at the custom-designed mobile unit, a sleek, technologically advanced vehicle that would provide essential DMV services to disabled citizens, remote communities, and underprivileged areas across the state. Dad would have loved this. He would have seen the true potential for civic improvement. The ceremony was smaller than the previous grand opening, more intimate, but infinitely more meaningful. The attendees were primarily people whose lives had already been touched by the Sterling Trust's work, by the DMV's improved services. Former beneficiaries who'd found stable employment, scholarship recipients now thriving in college, community leaders whose grassroots initiatives had finally received funding. As I cut the ribbon, a profound sense of peace and purpose settled over me. I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The night Leo had abandoned me at this very DMV, believing he was delivering me to my lowest point, to my ultimate defeat. Instead, he'd brought me home. Home to the place where I could do the most good, where I could truly honor my father's legacy, unburdened by deception. "Mrs. Vance," called a voice from the small crowd. I turned to see David Chen, the private investigator who'd helped expose Leo's crimes, standing discreetly to the side. "Any final thoughts on everything that's happened?" I considered his question carefully, thoughtfully. "Sometimes," I said, my voice clear and strong. We think we're protecting what matters most by holding on tightly, by trusting the wrong people, by avoiding difficult truths. I learned that the only way to truly protect something precious is to fight for it when it's threatened, to face the darkness. Head on, no matter the personal cost. Because the truth, no matter how painful, will always set you free. After the ceremony, I drove to the cemetery where Dad was buried. I'd been coming here regularly since the trial ended, updating him on the Sterling Trust's progress and seeking his quiet guidance for difficult decisions. Leo was sentenced to 25 years, Dad, I said, kneeling beside his headstone, arranging a fresh bouquet of the same white roses he'd loved. Marcus got 15. Bridget will serve 12 years and pay full restitution to all the foundations she defrauded. They lost everything, Dad. Everything they thought they had taken. A soft breeze rustled the leaves of the old oak tree shading his grave, and I felt his presence as clearly as I had during those dark months when I thought I might lose everything. I kept your warning letter, Dad, I continued, tracing the engraving on his stone. The one about external influences. You knew Leo might try something like this, didn't you? You protected the trust, even from the grave. I smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. As I drove back to the Sterling Trust office, my office now, truly and completely, free of Leo's shadow, I reflected on how much had changed, on how much I had changed. The naive, trusting woman who'd signed away her power to a manipulative husband was gone. In her place was someone harder, perhaps, but infinitely wiser, immeasurably stronger. Someone who understood that true strength came not from avoiding betrayal, but from surviving it, from fighting for what was right, and from emerging on the other side, transformed and unstoppable. My phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. New family just arrived at the DMV, single mother with 2 kids. Lost their apartment when her husband cleaned out their bank account and disappeared. Sound familiar? I smiled, a genuine, empathetic smile, and typed back instantly. On my way, Olivia. Let's show her she's not alone. Let's show her that sometimes, abandonment is just the beginning of a new, stronger story. Because that's what the Sterling Trust had always been about. Not just providing money, but providing hope, dignity, and a second chance. And after everything I'd been through, I had plenty of both to share. The woman Leo had tried to destroy was gone. The woman who'd taken her place was unstoppable.